Freeman was, she was waiting in her wheelchair with her son, Herbert, for a bus to come. And they kept asking Herbert, you know, is it coming, is it coming? He said, no, Mom, it's not coming yet. Yeah. And he covered her to keep her out of the sun. Yeah. And when the bus came, she was dead. Mm-hmm. And they told Herbert that you have to get on this bus or we don't know if we'll be able to come back for you. So he covered his mother, and he left her there, and her body sat there for 3 days.
What?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is Ethel's Sestina. Gonna be obedient in this here chair. Gonna bide my time and stand against this sun. I asked my boy, and all he says is, wait. He wipes my brow with steam, says I should sleep. I trust his every word. Herbert, my son, I believed him when he said help's gonna come. Been so long since all these suffering folks come to this place. Now on the ground round my chair, they sweat in my shade. Keep asking my son, could that be a bus they see? It's the sun fooling them, shining much too loud for sleep, making us hear engines and wheels. Not yet though. Wait. Lord, some folks praying for rain while they wait, forgetting what rain can do. When it comes, it smashes living flat, wakes you from sleep, eats the street, and washes you clean out the chair you've been sitting in. Best to praise this sun, shine this dry shine. Lord have mercy, son, is it coming? Such a strong man, my son. Can't help but believe when he tells us to wait. Yeah. Now wait some more. I wish some trees would block the sun. We wait. Ain't no white men or buses come. But look, see that there? Get me out this chair, boy. Help me stand on up. Ain't no time for sleeping, because look what's rumbling this way. If you sleep, you're going to miss it. Look there, I tell my son. He don't hear. I'm about to get out this chair, but the ghost in my leg tells me to wait. Wait for the salvation that's sure to come. I see my Savior's face alongside that sun. Nobody sees me running toward the sun. Lord, they think I done gone and fell asleep. They don't hear. Come. 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 Ain't but one power make me leave my son. I can't wait, Herbert. Lord knows I can't wait. Don't cry, boy. I ain't in that chair no more. I wish you could have come on this journey, son. Seen that old sweet sun lift me out of sleep. I didn't have to wait. And look. See my golden chair?
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Friday, September 11th, 2015. So I have been told. You heard Patricia Smith, a black female author, at the beginning of the program. That was her poem, Ethel's Sestina. Ethel Freeman, if you watch When the Levees Broke, you will be able to see Ethel Freeman as well as her son, and he gives a lot more details about what they did to try to deal with the massive flooding and then being stuck, not getting any help, not getting evacuated, and having to sit and watch his mother die. Incidentally, he said when the buses finally did arrive 4 days after the death of his mother, that when they were about to leave, or close to the time when they were about to leave, that he was trying to go back just to get, a quiet moment to pay his final respects to his mom, and just, the horror of it all. And he said that an armed National Guardsman with an AK-47 told him, you're not going to do anything. You're going to get on this bus and sit down, and that's that. And, he's, he's out with nothing, with armed guardsmen telling him what he's going to do. So he had no option, just horrible all the way around. He did go to court to try to sue the city of New Orleans for their negligence in the cause of his mother's death. His case was not upheld, of course. Context of White Supremacy. With that, we are reading Gary Rivlin, Katrina, After the Flood. We're picking up on Chapter 2. For folks who are following along, just go to the beginning of Chapter 2. That's what we're picking up at for today. Really enjoying the book and just looking forward to getting started. Hopefully folks are learning, getting constructive information, and valuing the session. With that, we will begin. Context of White Supremacy, Mr. Gary Rivlin, Katrina, After the Flood, audio session number 1. Chapter 2. Air Force One. Sally Foreman was asleep when her BlackBerry rang for the first time in several days. It was 5:30 a.m. on the Friday after Katrina. Foreman, who was Mayor Ray Nagin's communications director, was lying on a mattress on the floor of the Hyatt across the street from City Hall. She had been dreaming that she was drowning when the ringing phone woke her up. Her husband, Ron, who would in a few months announce he was running for mayor against her boss, was lying next to her and still asleep. Sally. It was a woman's voice. This is Maggie Grant from the White House. Instinctively, Foreman jumped to turn on a light. Then she remembered the hotel had no electricity. "You're the first call to come through on my BlackBerry," she told the caller, her tongue thick and her mind fuzzy. She asked Grant to repeat her name and had the presence of mind to ask her title. Grant identified herself as Director of Intergovernmental Affairs. "We understand that the mayor has not been saying very favorable things about the president for the last 24 hours, Grant said. Of course. Foreman's boss's rant was on the radio the day before. "It's not personal. It's been terrible. That's exactly why I'm calling. The president realizes he may not have gotten accurate information this week and wants to hear directly from the mayor. On the 5th day of the still unfolding disaster, George W. Bush was coming to New Orleans to see the devastation for himself. Could the mayor meet the president at the airport that afternoon?" George Bush was in Crawford, Texas, nearing the end of a month-long stay at his ranch when Katrina slammed the Gulf Coast. The vice president, Dick Cheney, was fly fishing, and the president's chief of staff, Andrew Card, was on vacation with his family in Maine. Michael Brown, director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, had ordered every FEMA employee must be on the job, whether or not he or she had a planned vacation, but that sense of urgency was apparently not shared by his bosses. On Sunday, when the highways out of New Orleans were thick with people trying to escape the storm, Bush logged onto the daily video conference FEMA initiates when preparing for a potential disaster. Normally, only state and local emergency response officials listen in. But this time the guest list included, in addition to the president, Michael Brown, and also Brown's boss, Michael Chertoff, head of the Department of Homeland Security. "I don't have any good news," Dr. Max Mayfield, the director of the National Hurricane Center, began. He compared Katrina to Hurricane Andrew, the 1992 colossus that destroyed or damaged more than 125,000 homes in southern Florida and killed at least 26 people. "Right now, this is a Category 5 hurricane," Mayfield said of Katrina, "very similar to Hurricane Andrew in the maximum intensity. But the ominous difference," he added, "was that this hurricane is much larger than Andrew ever was." The president spoke near the end of the call. "I want to assure the folks at the state level that we are fully prepared to not only help you during the storm, but we will move in whatever resources and assets we have at our disposal after the storm to help you deal with the loss of property." Hearing how that might sound, he added, "And we pray for no loss of life, of course." Bush kept to his regular schedule on Monday. The White House talking points that week called for the president to focus on immigration reform and the new Medicare prescription drug benefit, scheduled to go in effect that January. In the morning, the president flew to Arizona, where his first task was political. August 29th was John McCain's 69th birthday, and Bush arrived with a cake. There on the tarmac in the 110-degree heat, the president posed with his former political rival before the two politicians went their own ways. The president's motorcade drove to the Pueblo El Mirage RV and Golf Resort, where Bush touted his drug plan in front of an invitation-only audience of around 400. He spoke at length about the war in Iraq, but offered only a few words about Katrina. It was more of the same after a quick flight to Southern California. The president spoke about Medicare at a senior center that afternoon, and again that evening in a town hall-style meeting in the town of Rancho Cucamonga in San Bernardino County. Only at this last stop did he address the images people were seeing on TV all day. For those of you who are concerned about whether or not we're prepared to help, don't be, he said. We're in place. The president and the first lady spent the night in the Hotel de Coronado, where Bush was scheduled to give a speech the next morning. In New Orleans, Marty Bahamonde was not feeling nearly as confident as the president. FEMA had sent Bahamonde, a regional external affairs director in its Boston office, to New Orleans ahead of the storm. Bahamonde was planning to ride out the hurricane in a hotel near the airport, but at 4 a.m. on Sunday, someone had knocked on his door to tell him that he had 2 hours to vacate the premises. Bahamonde phoned the Emergency Operations Center in Jefferson Parish, but when no one there answered, he called the one in New Orleans. He jumped when Ray Nagin's people invited him to ride out the storm inside City Hall. On Sunday night, he watched the head of the city's emergency operations order his people to scavenge every last roll of toilet paper they could find and get it to the Superdome as soon as they could. What else hadn't they thought of, he asked himself. Bahamonde was in the Emergency Operations Center on Monday at around 10:30 a.m. when the city learned of a major breach in a flood wall along the 17th Street Canal. Using his BlackBerry, Bahamonde texted the news to his colleagues. 2 hours later, the agency's Deputy Director of Public Affairs was circulating an email reporting the breach. Water flow bad into New Orleans, she wrote, adding Bahamonde's estimate that parts of the city were under 11 feet of water. All day, the city's Emergency Operations Center was receiving reports of more failures in the area's storm protection system. Late Monday afternoon, Bahamonde insisted room be made for him on a Coast Guard helicopter so he could assess the damage. From his vantage point in the air, he estimated that 75% of New Orleans was underwater. By 7 p.m., he was on the phone with Michael Brown, who promised to immediately phone the White House. Back at the city's Emergency Operations Center, Bahamonde ran into Ray Nagin, where he told the mayor that most of his city was underwater. Nagin was stunned, Bahamonde said. He had this vacant expression as he listened to me that said everything. Bahamonde slept that night under a desk in City Hall. He used a roll-up shirt as a pillow. Brown was already in Baton Rouge when he briefed the president by video conference early on Tuesday morning. The vice president was on the call, as were other top officials. "What's the situation?" Bush began. "Bad," Brown responded. This was the big one. Brown confessed it was more than FEMA could handle and raised the idea of sending troops to New Orleans. Speaking from his vacation home in Wyoming, Cheney assured Brown that they would reach out to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. After that call ended, a Black Hawk helicopter flew Brown to New Orleans for a quick tour of the disaster zone. Along with Governor Kathleen Blanco and Louisiana's 2 U.S. Senators, Mary Landrieu and David Vitter. They landed on a helicopter pad atop a parking structure adjacent to the Superdome. Bahamonde pulled Brown aside to speak privately. "It's critical, sir, especially here at the Superdome," Bahamonde warned his boss. Barely 24 hours after the city started filling up with water, they were already out of food and low on water. Medical personnel were overwhelmed. The president kept to his schedule on Tuesday. It was the 60th anniversary of the Japanese surrender in World War II, and Bush was at the North Island Naval Air Station in San Diego to talk about the war in Iraq. The president compared the fight in Iraq with the struggle to repel the German fascists and Japanese imperialists. "The terrorists of our century are making the same mistake that the followers of other totalitarian ideologies made in the last century," Bush said. After his speech, the country singer Mark Willis gave the president a guitar stamped with the presidential seal, and Bush pretended to strum a few chords. "It made for an odd juxtaposition," the historian Douglas Brinkley wrote in The Great Deluge, "this photograph of Bush playing air guitar while Americans were seeing agony in pictures from the Gulf Coast." The president stopped at the Naval Medical Center in Balboa Park, where he awarded a Purple Heart to a wounded corpsman and met with another 24 soldiers injured in Iraq. Bush slept that night in Crawford and the next day flew home to the White House, several days earlier than planned. The last massive hurricane to hit New Orleans was Betsy in 1965. A Category 4 storm, Betsy flooded parts of the city and caused widespread power outages. The next night, President Lyndon Johnson showed up at a shelter, stood on a crate, and, with people shining flashlights on his face, promised to help the city any way he could. 40 years later, another president from Texas demonstrated his concern for those swept up in a disaster by ordering Air Force One to detour over New Orleans and dip below the cloud canopy so he could see the damage for himself. A White House photographer snapped pictures as Bush stared out the airplane window. Even Karl Rove, the president's top political advisor, would dub the photo op a big mistake. A few hours after landing in Washington that Wednesday, Bush addressed the nation. For the past 48 hours, the viewing public had heard about little else except the government's lack of response to the human suffering they could see on television. But rather than offer a mea culpa, the president boasted of all the federal government was doing to help. In the Rose Garden, standing flanked by members of his cabinet, he recited statistics. 400 trucks had been used to deliver 5.4 million meals and 13.4 million liters of water to the stricken area. The New York Times editorial page described this half-hearted, stilted address as one of the worst speeches of his life. Before going to bed on Wednesday night, Bush spoke to Nagin for the first time. "We're trying to come and see you real soon," the president assured him. "Everything is going to be all right." Bush didn't help his cause when, during appearance on ABC's Good Morning America, he said, "I don't think anyone anticipated the breach of the levees." No statement seemed a more transparent statement of how poorly the president had been briefed. Even Karl Rove felt obliged to contradict that claim in his 2010 memoir titled Courage and Consequence. Computer models, Rove wrote, had long anticipated a horrific disaster if a Katrina-like storm ever hit the city. "Where the hell is the cavalry?" Kate Hale, the emergency management director in Dade County, Florida, asked during a 1992 press conference 3 days after Hurricane Andrew. For God's sake, where are they? Congressional hearings were held, followed by a report condemning FEMA as a kind of turkey farm for political donors and bureaucrats past their sell-by date. Jimmy Carter had created FEMA in 1979 through executive order. Barely a decade later, no shortage of voices inside and outside government were calling for its abolition. James Lee Witt, Bill Clinton's choice to head the agency, saved FEMA. At first, his appointment seemed more of the same. A friend of the president dating back to when they were children. The son of an Arkansas sharecropper who had never finished high school. Witt's background proved easy fodder for partisans seeking to stir trouble for the new president. But Witt also had a resume that distinguished him from every past FEMA chief. Having served as director of the Arkansas Office of Emergency Services for nearly half of Clinton's 12-year tenure as governor, Witt was the first director of FEMA to have actual emergency management experience. Witt's first priority after taking over the agency was to spend less time on continuity of government plans for after a nuclear attack and other doomsday scenarios and focus instead on what he called real-life disasters, such as floods and tornadoes. He put his people through customer service training and pushed them to help locals with emergency preparedness. Witt championed the idea of pre-positioning supplies and first responders so that they were closer to where they would be needed after a disaster, and he convinced Clinton to raise the FEMA director to a cabinet level. "I've got to pay the administration a compliment," George W. Bush said to Vice President Al Gore during one of the 2000 presidential debates. "James Lee Witt of FEMA has done a really good job." Witt was that rare public servant who had champions among both Democrats and Republicans. Bush's first FEMA director was Joe Albaugh, a party operative who had moved to Texas in 1994 to work on Bush's first gubernatorial campaign. Albaugh served as Governor Bush's chief of staff until resigning to become the campaign manager of his 2000 presidential run. A grateful president-elect asked Albaugh, the son of an Oklahoma wheat farmer, if a job as agriculture secretary interested him, but he said he would prefer to be head of FEMA. That way, he said, he could at least occasionally play hero on the public stage. "You're not always in the limelight," he said, "but when you are, it's for all the marbles." Although Albaugh had no disaster management experience, the Senate confirmed his appointment 91-0. Incompetence hurt the Bush administration after Katrina, but so too did ideology. The Bush administration slashed FEMA's budget under Albaugh, who pulled the plug on Witt interventions such as Project Impact, which helped communities become more disaster resistant. Following the September 11 attacks, money grew even tighter as Albaugh revived some of the doomsday preparedness projects that Witt had shut down. FEMA would lose more of its clout when in 2003 it was merged into the Department of Homeland Security the Bush administration created after the terrorist attacks. Albaugh objected to that change, arguing that the move would rob FEMA of both independence and bureaucratic clout. He tendered his resignation soon after losing that fight. In his place, the president nominated Albaugh's number 2, Michael Brown, the man Bush famously referred to as Brownie. Like Albaugh, Brown had no disaster management experience prior to arriving in Washington. He had been an Oklahoma-based lawyer who worked for the International Arabian Horse Association when Albaugh, a longtime friend, hired Brown as FEMA's general counsel, then elevated him to deputy director. At the time of Katrina, FEMA's top 3 appointees had worked as political operatives for the president. 5 of FEMA's top 8 officials had negligible disaster management experience, the Washington Post found, and 9 of the agency's 10 regional chiefs were either serving as an acting director or filling 2 jobs at once. Yet one didn't need to be an expert in disasters to know that a Category 5 storm aimed at New Orleans had the potential to overwhelm first responders. When shortly after its creation, the new Department of Homeland Security drew up its list of the 15 worst disasters that could confront the country, the detonation of a nuclear device made the list, as did a biological attack. But so too did a tropical storm making a direct hit on New Orleans. Even a hurricane of moderate strength, study after study showed, could cause more loss of life and property in this low-lying coastal city surrounded by water than even a major earthquake on the West Coast. "When I have a nightmare," said Eric Tolbert, who served as FEMA's disaster response chief until leaving the agency several months prior to Katrina, "it's a hurricane in New Orleans." Yet the country was waging a pair of expensive wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, creating pressure to shrink the size of government. Not only FEMA, but the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which had built and maintained New Orleans' flood protection system, were feeling the financial squeeze. In 2004, the Corps said it needed at least $22.5 million to shore up the levees in the New Orleans metro area. The Bush administration budgeted $4 million for New Orleans and compromised with Congress on a final outlay of $5.5 million. Yet somehow the government found $14 million to dredge a man-made canal known mainly by its local name, Mr. Go, Mississippi River Gulf Outlet. For years, coastal experts had been calling on the federal government to close down this underused and fragile 76-mile waterway that the Army Corps of Engineers had so arrogantly built 40 years earlier to save ships from the twists and turns of the Mississippi through southern Louisiana. Critics called Mr. Go a hurricane highway that would amplify the storm surge, exactly what happened during Katrina. The water from Mr. Go caused severe flooding in the eastern half of New Orleans and also St. Bernard's Parish to the south and east. Brown was not the complete incompetent he was made out to be in media accounts. He could be smug and arrogant, but he was also bureaucratically adept and could be tenacious, especially when fighting his superiors on behalf of the agency under his charge. He even managed to pry a few $1 million from his tight-fisted bosses to run a series of war games-like exercises so they better prepared for natural disasters. The first of these was Hurricane Pam, a hypothetical storm that planners imagined hitting New Orleans. Pam should have been the lucky break that saved FEMA's reputation post-Katrina. Its designers imagined a powerful, slow-moving Category 3 storm, Katrina. The city's flood protection system was rated as strong enough to withstand a Category 3 storm. But computer simulations paid for by FEMA showed that the levees would breach with catastrophic consequences. As much as 90% of the city would flood even in a Category 3 storm, and an estimated 50,000 would seek shelter in the Superdome or another refuge of last resort. Incredibly, Hurricane Katrina had not only been imagined in July 2004, 13 months before the storm actually hit, but the hundreds of government employees FEMA brought together in New Orleans for the exercise had practiced their response. They imagined everything from the number of boats they would need to conduct search and rescue to the truckloads of bottled water needed to hydrate the survivors. The government was supposed to spend a few $100,000 more on follow-up discussions and meetings, but most of those slated for the first half of 2005 were scrapped due to a lack of funds. The government spent around $800,000 on the Hurricane Pam simulation, but left the project unfinished. Brown blamed his boss, Michael Chertoff, the federal judge whom Bush had named to run Homeland Security at the start of 2005, and other top administration officials for cutting off the money. some presidential historians argue that the Bush presidency died in New Orleans that week. If so, ego is in part to blame. The FEMA directorship was no longer a cabinet-level position with direct access to the president and his top people, but Brown, claiming he didn't want to waste precious time going through proper channels, contacted the White House directly in those first hours after the levees broke. By Tuesday night, Michael Chertoff had had enough. Brown was on a military plane heading back to Baton Rouge when the Homeland Security Secretary reached his insubordinate underling. He grounded Brown, ordering him not to leave Baton Rouge. As Brown told the story to Chris Cooper and Robert Block, the authors of Disaster, Hurricane Katrina, and the Failure of Homeland Security, when he pointed out that he was supposed to meet Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour at the Gulf Coast, Chertoff said, "I don't give a shit," and hung up. After that, Brownie ran the rescue operations from his hotel room. Brown was the designated face of FEMA's stunted response to Katrina, but plenty of people deserved blame. First on that list might be a former Marine general named Matthew Broderick, who ran Homeland Security's Operations Center during Katrina. Broderick's job was to synthesize the snippets of intelligence the government was receiving and keep Chertoff and top people in the White House up to date. Broderick and Bahamondes' report of a major levee breach Monday morning and his first-hand observations from a Coast Guard helicopter by that evening. At 1:15 p.m. on Monday, the Coast Guard sent out an email reporting on a levee breach that caused at least 8 feet of flooding in the 9th Ward. As Broderick drove to work from his Virginia home on Tuesday morning, radio reports declared New Orleans a flooded city. Yet not until later in the afternoon on Tuesday did he send out a bulletin confirming that most of the city was underwater. Asked to explain the delay, he cited a television report he had glimpsed Monday evening on a TV in the agency's break room. On the screen, people were being interviewed inside a French Quarter bar. How bad could it be, Broderick thought, if people were drinking and carrying on in the center of town? Broderick and his people never seemed to catch up. Their Wednesday intelligence report told of 12,000 to 15,000 people stranded at the Superdome when the true number was closer to 25,000. That same report also failed to note that, in an act of desperation, the city had opened its convention center as a second refuge of last resort, despite lack of provisions there. On Wednesday morning, the Louisiana State Police were estimating that another 25,000 were inside the convention center. Yet not until Thursday did Broderick's intelligence report even mention it. Actually, I have not heard a report of thousands of people in the convention center who don't have food and water, Chertoff said during an appearance Thursday night on NPR, though by that time the cable stations were doing stand-ups in front of the building. Talking to Ted Koppel later that night, Brown estimated that around 5,000 people were in the convention center. In the first several days after Katrina, the average cable news viewer seemed to know more about the catastrophe than the people running the show from Washington. This is going to get real ugly real fast, FEMA's Marty Bahamonde wrote in a text message he sent to his bosses the Sunday night before Katrina even reached New Orleans. They had been expecting 15 trucks loaded with bottled water, but only 5 arrived. They had also received 320,000 fewer MRE, meals ready to eat, which the military uses on the battlefield, than requested. After the PAM exercises, FEMA had promised to pre-stage 400 buses and 800 drivers just outside the storm zone to be ready to cart people out of the city. For days, everyone from Governor Blanco down was yelling for the buses, but the answer was always the same: tomorrow. Even if the FEMA buses had come on Wednesday, George Bush would have looked like a hero, Kathleen Blanco said. the promised buses wouldn't start arriving en masse until Friday morning. "We need to get people out of here," Blanco told Brown when the two were in New Orleans on Tuesday morning. "We need buses." Nagin also stressed the need for buses when he met Brown that same morning. At Bahamonde's suggestion, the mayor had arrived with a list. "Be as specific as possible to help FEMA do its job," Bahamonde had coached the mayor and his people. Maybe it's only an apocryphal story meant to underscore the government's ineptitude, but one well-traveled report had Brown or one of his people misplacing the mayor's list after receiving it Tuesday morning. "Sir, the situation in the Superdome is past critical," Bahamonde wrote to Brown on Wednesday morning. Yet, once grounded in Baton Rouge, Brown seemed focused more on ensuring that he still looked to be in charge than on managing his team. "In his crisis and on TV, you need to look more hardworking," a handler wrote to Brown in an email that eventually would be made public. "Roll up the sleeves." When Brown's press secretary asked people via email to leave her boss alone for a couple of hours so he could enjoy a proper meal before an appearance on MSNBC, Bahamonde had had enough of the email string he was reading. "Tell her," Bahamonde pecked out on his BlackBerry, "that I just ate an MRE and crapped in the hallway with 30,000 other close friends, so I understand her concern about busy restaurants." Hundreds of New Orleans police officers went AWOL in those first few days after the flooding. By midweek, Eddie Compass, the chief of police, announced that his people would no longer help in the rescue efforts because he didn't believe he had enough of a force to maintain order in dry parts of town. Blanco requested that troops be sent to New Orleans, as did Nagin and Michael Brown. The White House at first indicated that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld was unavailable. He was spotted sitting in the owner's box at a San Diego Padres baseball game Tuesday night. Days of delays followed as lawyers inside the White House argued over lines of authority and paperwork rather than ordering the military to the region and sorting out the legal technicalities later. By Thursday, 3 days after the levees broke, the police were running out of ammunition, and Chief Compass, a friend of Nagin's since childhood, breathlessly told a mayor a story about how he was nearly taken hostage inside the convention center. "People are shooting at officers there," Compass said, "but we can't shoot back because we don't want to hit innocent people." The chief was clearly shaken up, Nagin concluded, but he didn't know what to tell his old friend except to suggest that he get some rest. Turning to longtime aide Terry Davis, Nagin said, "This thing looks like it could blow. It'll take a miracle for us to hold it together." Ray Nagin hadn't figured on riding out the storm on a large leather couch in his office on the second floor of City Hall. But someone woke up the mayor at around midnight the Sunday before Katrina hit. The winds were causing the building to sway, and people were nervous about staying inside the cement structure. So in the middle of the night, the mayor and key staff moved across the street to the Hyatt. That first night, Nagin chose to sleep on a cot in a fourth-floor ballroom where the city had set up an auxiliary command center rather than in a suite that had been reserved in his name on the 27th floor. Raindrops so large they sounded like gunshots as they hit the building, Nagin wrote in a self-published memoir. Winds that screamed louder and crazier than a wild banshee, and a constant drone-like sci-fi possessed gods chanting ominous incantations. The night's most frightening moment came when the windows on the northern face of the hotel blew out, forcing the occupants of hundreds of rooms to flee to safer quarters. Nagin figured he got maybe 2 hours of sleep that first night. On Monday morning, Nagin spoke with the deputy police chief overseeing the city's 911 system. During one 23-minute period, he told Nagin the system received 600 calls. To learn what was going on, the deputy had listened in on a sampling of calls. He told the mayor it was people begging and screaming for help. "The water's up to my neck. Please come now. My husband has blown off the roof. My children are drowning." All day, Nagin learned about more levee breaches, but his meeting that night with FEMA's Marty Bahamonde underscored for Nagin the tragedy in the making. Water was covering 3/4 of the city. Thousands of people were stranded on rooftops and thousands more wading through waters to get to the Superdome, which was already nearing capacity. Alone in his suite that night, Nagin told himself that nothing mattered more in the coming days than his appearing calm. Around midday Tuesday, Nagin got his first glimpse from inside a Black Hawk helicopter of the watery Atlantis over which he now presided. The mayor fixated on the 17th Street Canal, where Lake Pontchartrain was pouring through a large gash in the levee wall. To his eye, the city would continue filling with water until they plugged this breach that measured 450 feet. From the air, he saw the restaurant in the middle-class enclave of Lakeview, where he and his wife and the youngest of his 3 children had dined on the Saturday night before the storm. 10 feet of water now covered it. "What do you need, Mr. Mayor?" Bush asked Nagin when the two spoke by phone on Wednesday night. By that point, Nagin and his people had calculated that they needed more than 1,000 buses. A small caravan of trucks carting water and food rations would have helped make a terrible experience a little less miserable for thousands of people. The city needed military medevac teams at both the Superdome and the Convention Center. Nagin instead chose to make a single request of the president: plug the 17th Street Canal. His communications director, Sally Foreman, jumped on him as soon as he was done talking to the president. Nagin cut her off, snapping, "Let him do this one damn thing, Sally, and then we'll move to the next set of needs." In some ways, Wednesday was the week's low point for the mayor and his people. "Absolutely brutal," Nagin said of the weather that day. It felt like it was at least 110 degrees with 100% humidity. The hotel's bathrooms had stopped working, so people started using the stairwell when they needed to relieve themselves. Every day, Nagin, a former athlete, hobbled by a bum knee, and his staff used those same overheated stairwells to reach their rooms on the 27th floor. "I worked hard not to step in the excrement," Sally Foreman said of her regular treks from the 4th floor command center to her hotel room down the hall from the mayor's. Nagin described the experience as stiflingly putrid. The Superdome next door was becoming a bigger worry. The cavernous indoor stadium had large holes punched in its roof. The facility was without electricity or working toilets and was critically low on water, food, and medical supplies. It also connected to the Hyatt via a second-floor pedestrian bridge. The National Guard, who were responsible for security there, had been asking for reinforcements, but none were coming. They were vulnerable, Chief Eddie Compass told the mayor and others. From an informant inside the Superdome, the chief claimed he was hearing that a small cabal was plotting a kind of insurrection. It would start with a diversionary action, the informant said. They would then overwhelm the National Guard, rush the pedestrian bridge, and take over the command center the city had established on the hotel's 4th floor. Compass's wife was 8 months pregnant and staying with him at the Hyatt, along with their 3-year-old daughter. The chief didn't hesitate when he heard a gunshot in the parking lot outside the Superdome on Wednesday afternoon. he burst into the city's fourth-floor emergency command center and ordered people upstairs for their own safety. We all ran up 23 flights of stairs to the 27th floor, said Nagin. Others stayed behind to barricade the second-floor walkway. Yes, we boarded ourselves into the Hyatt, said Greg Murfert, a top city official at Nagin's side that week. There was this real fear that there was going to be this mass break-in. That night, lying in a hot hotel room with windows that did not open, Nagin heard gunshots on the street. I really didn't think we'd make it through Wednesday night, he wrote, without an Armageddon-like war occurring in the total darkness. Thursday brought more of the same. There were no convoys of supplies and no buses, only the occasional coach pulling up in front of the Superdome. Nagin was livid with Bush and even angrier with Blanco. On a hand-cranked radio in his suite, surrounded by staffers, Nagin caught a snippet of a Blanco press conference on the one local station still broadcasting, WWL-AM. Mainly what he heard was a governor boasting about all that the state was doing to help New Orleans. I have had it with all this bullshit, he told people around him. I'm calling in to set the record straight. They had given up trying to get their satellite phones to work, but Greg Murfertz, the city's chief technology officer, figured out a way to make an analog phone work over a computer line. They reached Garland Robinette, the well-regarded talk show host in WWL's studios. On air, Nagin mocked the president for his Air Force One flyover and then lit into both the governor and the president. Maybe it's Bush's fault. Maybe it's Blanco's, Nagin told Robinette. But either way, the president needs to get his ass on a plane so he can sit down with the governor and figure things out. Get off your asses and do something, he implored both Blanco and Bush, and let's fix the biggest goddamn crisis in the history of this country. Nagin finally woke up to some good news on Friday morning. Looking out the window, he saw several buses on the interstate headed toward the Superdome. He also spotted a convoy of military supply trucks. He called out and people came rushing in. That's when Sally Foreman shared the news about her early morning call. So buses have just happened to start arriving the day the president makes his first visit, Nagin said. Air Force One left Washington at around 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The president's first stop was the Mississippi Gulf Coast, where he held an airport press conference. He was joined by a pair of Republican governors, Bob Riley of Alabama and Mississippi's Haley Barbour. I want to thank Mike Brown and his staff, Bob Riley said. FEMA has absolutely been great. I want to join with Bob, Barbour said. The federal government is great. FEMA and all your people who are on the ground. When it was his turn to speak, the president used those compliments to give a public pat on the back to his beleaguered FEMA director. Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job. Maggie Grant had asked Sally Foreman to have Nagin at the airport about an hour before Bush's scheduled arrival at around 1 p.m. For security purposes, the government flies 2 Air Force Ones, one as a conveyance for the president and his entourage, the other as a decoy. They would have Nagin wait in the 2nd Air Force One, Grant had said, until the president's arrival, which gave Foreman an idea. It had been days since any of them had bathed. Forgive me for asking, but is there any way the mayor could take a shower while he waits? Foreman asked. The president's trip was in part to make a friend in Ray Nagin. Grant seemed pleased to provide so easy a deliverable. Absolutely. Foreman remembers her enthusing. Nagin would be able to use a bathroom on the decoy plane. The chief flight attendant was named Reggie, whom Nagin described as a brother from New York. I'm not sure who you are, Nagin remembers Reggie telling him as he ushered the mayor to the president's private quarters, but it's very rare that someone other than the president uses this part of the plane. Nagin figured he was in the shower barely 10 minutes when Reggie knocked on the door to warn him of the president's imminent arrival. Rather than finish up, Nagin soaped up a second time and then a third for what he described as a triple lather shower. He took his time shaving and waxing his head for the coming photo ops. We had waited for the president for several days, he said, so he could at least wait a few minutes for me. For his meeting with the president, Nagin wore a pair of dress slacks and a clean white t-shirt stamped with the word desire. Kathleen Blanco was sitting at a table in the belly of the president's plane when Nagin arrived. So too were Senators Mary Landrieu and David Vitter and several congressmen, including Bobby Jindal, the 34-year-old Republican whom Blanco had defeated for governor, and Bill Jefferson, a black Democrat who represented New Orleans East. Michael Chertoff and Michael Brown were also there. The president entered after Nagin, who was struck by the president's swagger. A cowboy-type walk with slight bow legs. Bush took a seat at the head of the table and lunch was served. The elected officials took turns sharing their frustrations with FEMA. Nagin, sitting to the president's immediate left, went last. Some around the table felt as if they were watching a man unglued. By several accounts, his eyes grew wider the longer he spoke and he began to tremble. Senator David Vitter remembered Nagin angrily slamming down his hand and barking at Bush and Blanco. Blanco thought the mayor was on the verge of a breakdown. My adrenaline was flowing and my pulse was a bit elevated, Nagin said. After their meeting, Bush and Blanco met in private. There in the Oval Office in the sky, the president pressed her to sign a document that would allow him to federalize the National Guard troops, which otherwise fall under a governor's jurisdiction. The governor, whose staff opposed the idea, asked the president for 24 hours to consider the proposal. She knew that even without her signature, the president had the authority to take over the National Guard. Bush's father had done so after the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles in 1992. Bush also had the power to send military forces to an area that Blanco had declared to be in a state of emergency even before Katrina made landfall. But Blanco's staff feared that by making a big show of the governor handing control to the president, Bush and his people could later cast her as not up to task of command, a woman paralyzed by fear. Senator Mary Landrieu, a Democrat, cornered Nagin while Bush and Blanco met. "You're being played," she warned the mayor. Landrieu thought she was stating the obvious. The president's people were hoping to use Nagin to help discredit Blanco and distract attention from their own failures in the days after Katrina. Nagin saw Air Force One as bringing to their disaster the worst of Washington politics. She was going on and on about us not smiling if we stood beside the president, according to Nagin. I remember telling her, "You've got to be kidding." In an air-conditioned mobile unit parked on a tarmac nearby, Blanco's staffers were delivering a similar warning to their counterparts from New Orleans. Don't allow yourselves to be used by the Bush administration. 3 helicopters were parked near Air Force One to take the presidential entourage on a tour of the city. The president walked a little ahead of the pack and called for Nagin to join him. Nagin remembers the president slipping an arm around his shoulder and asking him if he was still angry. "My staff said you used some strong words yesterday on the radio," Bush said. Nagin apologized but asked the president what he would have done if he were in the same spot. "Mr. Mayor, I know we could have done better," Nagin quotes Bush as telling him. Blanco joined Bush and Nagin on Marine One, the presidential helicopter. The other politicians rode the second helicopter, followed by the media documenting the president's tour of the flood-ravaged city. As they flew over New Orleans, Bush peppered Nagin with questions. The helicopters landed near the breach in the 17th Street Canal. Where there had been no activity the day before, the crews of soldiers were now working with trucks and sandbags. Nagin walked off to get a closer look, but a Secret Service agent jogged over to fetch him. Apparently, the president had been calling for me, Nagin later wrote. The two spoke for another 15 minutes. Blanco and Landreau were fuming, Nagin said, because the president's people kept them out of all the key photo shoots. Back at the airport, Bush looked into the television cameras and said, "I believe that the great city of New Orleans will rise again and be a greater city. I believe the town where I used to come to enjoy myself, occasionally too much, will be that very same town, that it will be a better place to come." That night, after a debriefing with his staff, Nagin stood by the window in his suite with several of his top people. He looked over his darkened city. Ever since the levees had broken, he had been asking himself, why me? Today he had spent time with the President of the United States and watched buses clear people from the Superdome. Things were progressing more slowly at the convention center, but at least people there had food and water. Finally, the Army Corps of Engineers was working to seal the 17th Street levee breach. The mayor's face brightened as he stared at his reflection in the glass. He had his answer. "Are you okay?" asked Sally Foreman, who noticed the strange look on the mayor's face. "This is God's plan for me." "What is?" "To build a new New Orleans." They smiled at him in quiet agreement. At least that's how the mayor imagined it when he recreated the moment years later. Chapter 3. Behind Enemy Lines. Lance Hill wasn't leaving town just because Ray Nagin had declared it. If anything, a mandatory evacuation order from Nagin was a reason to stay in New Orleans through Katrina. A black man playing frontman for the white establishment, Hill said of Nagin, and one who hadn't bothered helping those without means remove themselves from harm's way. That July, city officials had distributed a DVD in low-income communities around the city. Its purpose was to let people know New Orleans was too broke to help even the infirm or the disabled in the event of a major hurricane. "Our main message," the DVD's producer told the Times-Picayune, "is that each person is primarily responsible for themselves." Hill, who is white, worked for Tulane University as an adjunct history professor and executive director of the Southern Institute for Education and Research, a center devoted to better race relations in the South. His wife, Aline, was a public school teacher. They were graying empty nesters with enough spare cash to get themselves out of town and seemingly the good sense to make it happen. But Hill, who had moved to the New Orleans area in the early 1980s, had embraced the local machismo that dictated that real men stay put when a hurricane threatens a community. "You don't leave until everyone leaves," he said. "You take care of the little old lady down the street. You take care of anyone needing help." 1 in 4 families in New Orleans was living on less than $20,000 a year at the time of Katrina. That same proportion of the population did not own a car. The storm came at the end of the month when people living paycheck to paycheck are typically low on funds. It also hit just prior to the start of school, an expensive time of the year for parents. An estimated 70,000 people, nearly 15% of the population, remained behind in New Orleans during Katrina for many reasons, but money played a big role. According to a study of the thousands of evacuees who ended up in Houston area shelters, 67% of those who needed to be rescued from New Orleans had a job, but 68% had neither cash in the bank nor a usable credit card. 2 in every 5 evacuees indicated that they were either physically disabled or were caring for someone who was. 80% were renters and their median income was under $15,000. The rich would have no problem leaving ahead of Katrina. They jetted to Aspen or Deer Valley, or on Saturday morning, they pointed their luxury sedans east and decamped to Destin, Florida, the preferred beachfront playground of Uptown's elite. They flew to Dallas, where they had a satellite office, or they remained because they could. Some New Orleanians were so rich that they faced almost no risk in staying in town. They lived on the high ground in homes along St. Charles Avenue or in Audubon Place, a gated community where the average home goes for a few $1,000,000. Their homes were well-constructed fortresses that had survived prior storms. Many had a generator powerful enough to keep at least one air conditioner running and the ice cubes frozen. That week in New Orleans, even as families camped on highway overpasses or stood stranded on rooftops, the occasional helicopter flew over Uptown to the green expanse of Audubon Park. That was the area's makeshift heliport for any of the city's well-heeled burghers who decided it was time to get out of town. Lance Hill didn't have helicopter money, but he lived uptown not far from Audubon Park and St. Charles Avenue. He was another white man on the wrong side of 50, pear-shaped and bald, walking the streets dressed in shorts and a t-shirt. If you were uptown and white right after Katrina, people assumed you were rich, he said. People let their guard down. I got to talk to everyone that way. To cops, to guardsmen, to anyone I'd meet on the street. So this former activist turned scholar who ran a center dedicated to the ideal of a more equitable, racially inclusive world passed among the city's barons and its princes, its eccentrics, and its captains of industry. I was in the middle of people who were openly planning for a city that was whiter and more affluent than before Katrina, Hill said. His newfound friends were the city's blue bloods, with roots stretching back multiple generations. Membership to the top-line Mardi Gras crews such as C.O.W.S and Rex, those mysterious pleasure clubs that helped establish the social order in New Orleans, and also the Boston Club, where city business was often worked out over tumblers of bourbon, was theirs by birthright. Hill eavesdropped on their conversations that week and concluded their vision was of a New Orleans a lot like the one their ancestors had enjoyed long before the city's black community came to dominate local politics. Katrina was their pretext for ridding New Orleans of enough blacks, Hill said, so that whites were once again in the majority. And I was sitting at the table, literally on occasion, sipping cocktails while they were discussing how they were going to accomplish this. Context of white supremacy. So we will pick up. I think this is still chapter 2. Double check. I think we're still in chapter 2. Did we already get to chapter 3? We're in chapter 3. Sorry about that. So we're kind of midway in chapter 3. Lance Hill kind of giving us the update on the obvious effort to move forward with ethnic cleansing post-Katrina. Context of white supremacy. Feel free to chime in if you have comments you would like to share, questions, things that you want to point out from the text. The number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. Number one more time is 641-715-3640. The code is 564-943#. Press *6 if you would like to participate. For folks, if you are having difficulties participating, or if you want to chime in and you don't have a phone, you can use the free HD line. That works anywhere in the world. It is free. You can use, it should be linked at the Black Talk Radio Network, but if you can't find the information there, the address is tiny, TINY.cc/1 race. And that is the number 1. The address again, tiny, TINY.cc/1 race. And that is the number 1. When you put that address in, click the link on the left side of the page. It says free flash phone. When you click it, it will open a tiny window on your screen. Click the number I just gave out, which again is 641-715-3640. The next line, it will ask for the code. That code again is 564943. On the last line, it will ask for a name. You can use a real name, you can use a nickname, whatever you're comfortable with. Once you get all that entered, click the green button at the bottom. It should connect you to the program. It is the same procedure if you would like to participate. Press *6. You'll see the dial pad on your screen. When you do that, you should hear an audio prompt to press the number 1. I'll see your hand on the screen, and we should be able to get you on a line. With that, we'll get folks who dialed in. If you have any commentary, things you would like to share, feel free. Let's not be nervous. Folks, go ahead and share. Let's not wait till the last minute. Hopefully people are getting constructive information and learning. Everybody who dialed in with a hand up, line should be open. Feel free to chime in. Folks who have a hand up, everyone who dialed in with a hand up should be with us. Feel free.
Have you heard?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Doc.
Greetings.
Respectfully. Glad to hear from you. Few observations. Hold it down for 1 second. Let me get to a quiet room.
I don't know if he's still trying to know. He said he was trying to get to a quiet room. Thomas in New York. That is, I don't know from other programs, but I will say that is one thing man, it is a broken record. When we have programs where we go to the phone lines and people call in, let us be prepared to talk. Like, it cannot be that everybody is in a loud environment. When we have the section, we know the format by now. I'm going to go to the phone lines first before I make my comments. It shouldn't be where we have lots of people who dial in and have a hand up and then nobody talks, or people take a long time to go ahead and comment.
Yes, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings, Gus. Greetings to the other callers and listeners. Turn your light on. Demery 4 here. Katrina after the storm. I've got whites are very skilled in using a non-white person as a scapegoat. That is, using a black person or a group of blacks being made to bear the blame of whites. As for Lance Hill, the well-meaning white person that supposedly started his activism at a young age, about 12 years old, according to Mr. Fuller, that's about the age that racism is passed on to younger whites by osmosis. And it seems as though by him starting at a young age that there may have been, he may have avoided some of the racism that was being perpetrated upon him in a way where he could understand people suffering. But all he did was to bring some water to people suffering from dehydration, no more than you would do for any animal in need of water. So the bodies floating face down were real people that had lives prior to the flood. We can only imagine the smell and the potential for disease at that time. There was no cell phone service. And like one of the callers said last week, that there was a lack of emotion or empathy for those people who lost their lives during the Katrina flood. I'm not one to start with the anti-blackness and to call out black people that had some culpability during the Katrina storm, but I have to mention that Chief Compass, Alden McDonald, Ray Nagin were all Catholic, and Catholicism is big in New Orleans. I just want to go off on a little tangent here on that for a few minutes, but the Catholic tradition and culture has become deeply ingrained in New Orleans. So even the word parish, where most states divide the territories up into counties, Louisiana divides the territories in parishes, which is it's a religious term. And one of the main landmarks in New Orleans, the St. Louis Cathedral, is, I believe it's I believe the St. Louis Cathedral is it's sort of like a headquarters for the archdiocese. But what I wanted to say was, in the USA Today, they reported that the people of New Orleans was angry with the archdiocese because they wanted to divert funds that was allocated to help the poor people in the urban areas. And the Catholic Church wanted to divert these funds to go to the suburban areas that was largely white areas. You know, what struck me is that if you have a large Catholic population in a certain area and you have a disaster, it seems like the church would come to your aid. And then we all know that the Catholic Church is very wealthy, and that I think that more could have been done to assist the poor people of New Orleans after this horrendous flood. And also on page 65, it said that the cell phone started working again, and there was a burst of hope that occurred among the city's leaders, and it mentioned McDonald's corporate peers, and I don't know who they were referring to, but if you are a bank president and founder of one of the third largest black banks in the nation, I would think that your corporate peers would include some white people. But I was wondering that if we were talking about white people's money at this particular time, there was a catastrophe that happened, it would play out a lot differently than it did in New Orleans. So I had a different view of Ray Nagin before I started reading this book. I really don't want to make the victim the culprit here, but I mean, when the president asks you, what can I do for you? And all you can come up with, you got people starving, they're thirsty, dehydrated, they have medical conditions that need to be addressed, and all you can come up with is patching up the 17th Street Canal. I find that astonishing. And who have ever heard of someone, you got thousands of people in the Superdome that are hungry and thirsty, and then you got, I think the one gunshot that he heard outside of the Civic Center or the Superdome was the black person that was killed by the police, and Chief Compass runs in and tells everybody that they need to go upstairs and they need to seek shelter because these angry, looting black people was conjuring up some insurrection. I think that that's ridiculous, really. And I think that his resignation later on was probably due to the fact that he did not control his officers. They abandoned their duties. They left squad cars and just took off. It was a dereliction of duty. He lost control of his officers, and then he did not bring any officers that were responsible for the shootings on the bridge or any of the other atrocities that police perpetrated upon the innocent victims of Katrina. Is, we have to call that out where it is. So that's not giving a pass to Governor Blanco, President Bush, who really did, he knew that he had diverted funds that would have shown up the levees in Louisiana, but he diverted those funds and then said that no one knew that the levees would break at that point. I think that he lied and he drug his feet on helping with the necessities that people need for life sustaining issues that the government could have provided for those people in need. So I'll mute my line right now and give somebody else a chance. Thanks for taking the call, Gus.
Appreciate that. Any of the other folks who chimed in with a hand up should be with us. Feel free to participate.
May I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Good evening, everyone. It's Carmen. I was particularly interested in the part where the governor's people, what's her name, Landry?
Blanco.
Anyway, what is it again? Blanco, that's right. Blanco said that when they started doing politics and they told Mayor Nagin, they said, now, when Bush's people show up, they're just setting you up and don't smile when they take your picture. Now, even though that might sound trivial to him, that setup has tremendous consequences, not only for the black person who's the figurehead, but for all of the people looking at him for leadership. And if a white person tells you that another white person is trying to set you up, one, it's to their benefit, of course, but two, you should listen. It's when a man-child tries to tell you about another man, listen. When a white person tries to tell you about white people, you should listen. And, for him to ignore that. And I can just tell you, that's not trivial. I get with people all the time. I say, let's practice. Put your hand out and say, stop. You do not have my consent to take my picture. I literally do that. I make people say that because they will set you up as a black person. So I am interested to see exactly how they set him up because I really don't know the details of his trial and incarceration. So I can't wait to hear more about that. And the other thing is that it does not, when white people tell you something about black people, it doesn't matter whether you think it's true or not because they are under such heavy delusions to themselves and their friends. It can't be true. They have no basis for judging anything about non-white people. It doesn't matter how honest you think they are, how they wouldn't lie to you. They are delusional in the extreme, and whatever they tell you will not be true. You just can't listen to them when they're talking about non-white people. And I used to chase hurricanes around and rescue people until I realized they were making me just rescue white people. And so when we trained in New Orleans, and I was just like, I have always been struck by the fact that they said, because I did a lot of reblock steps. And they said, okay, Carmen, you've got Charity Hospital, and you've got the top floor where the babies are. So, and they had these giant coats. You've seen the fireman coats, the yellow fireman coats, and I am not making this up. It was these giant coats, and this is what on our tour of the hospital and how we were going to break that down. And we were supposed to grab these giant yellow coats that they kept in a closet with huge pockets, and we were supposed to put a baby in each pocket. And I am not lying. And that's how you were supposed to get the babies down from the nursery intensive care unit and the neonatal intensive care unit. And they had coats with pockets. That was how to get them down off of, what was that, like the 8th floor, 12th floor, something like 7th floor, I think. And I was just always struck by how unprepared that was. And if this book does not say anything, if they say how Bush did this after 2 days and Nagin did that after 3 days, I will know that they are lying. Because it's like you said, guys, the military, the first thing you heard out of this hurricane was there was military on the outskirts of the city of New Orleans keeping people out. So all of this stuff about the National Guard waiting a few days, can I get your permission, and all this other stuff, who put that military there almost immediately to keep people out? So if this book does not address that, I know it's lying. I know it's lying big time. All right, those are my comments. Thanks.
Other folks who have comments that they would like to share, feel free. Lines should be open.
Will I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's try this again. My phone dropped before. I apologize. Had some observations, man. Mr. Demery brought up some great points. It gave me some history I didn't even know. Yeah, the Catholic Church, boy. Yeah, that's just another topic altogether. I don't know what was more criminal. You know, all this time I'm just thinking that the way they responded to this storm was terrible and just a criminal act. People should go to jail for how they responded to it. But then I see the preparation of the storm. I mean, that was even more criminal. I mean, they knew this was going to happen. And then it was the not having adequate apparatuses to stop the storm. You know, a few more million here, a few more million there. This could have probably not been as bad. And it just shows the reckless regard for Black lives. They knew this was New Orleans. This was mostly Black people, mostly poor Black people, and they didn't care. Just crazy. I mean, a country this rich could have just put $50 million down there and avoided all of this. You know, it was just, and it wasn't even 50 million. I just pulled that number out because that's nothing to them, you know. And there was a part there when he said that he lost control of his police. And I remember, you know, distinctly watching the coverage. They just played it over and over and over and over and over and over again on the news. And they kept showing these Black female cops going into the store with everyone else and running out with stuff and putting it in the trunk of the cop car and going back again. Sort of like the scene in The Purge where, in the scene in, you know, the movie with the zombies with Brad Pitt where the cop is, they think they're going to arrest him and he running in the store to get something himself. He lost total control of the cops, total control of everything. The qualifications, I mean, this is the federal government. These are big paying jobs. And these people aren't even qualified to do the job. You know, they don't even have an engineer or you know, maybe a general, you know, or something that in charge of FEMA and these positions. It's like, you know, whoever's the president's friends, whoever he had owed the political favor to, you know, they get the job, and the response was just terrible. It's no other way to describe it. And if maybe, you know, maybe if they put someone in charge that has qualifications on dealing with these things, and it would have been different, but they didn't care. You know, that's just how I feel. And I don't want to keep rambling. I'll do my line and wait for the second audio. Thanks for taking my call.
Anybody else we haven't heard from? Any other callers? Everyone with a hand up should be with us.
Greetings, Gus. Am I being heard?
Oh, my Lord. Be still, my beating heart. Thank you so much for joining with us. Grand to hear from you, as always, 404.
Yes, Gus. This is Sarah. You can call me Sarah or 404, whichever one you're most comfortable with. But greetings to you as well as greetings to all of the callers on the line. And the situation here, it is very troubling for me because my husband was born at Charity Hospital. So I am very familiar with that particular hospital. And to give a little background history on New Orleans and the Landrieu family, Mitch Landrieu is the first white mayor in New Orleans after his father, because after his father was the last white mayor before we had the Morial and then Ray Nagin that came in and was mayor. So he was the lieutenant governor. He left his post as lieutenant governor to run for the position because they had to get that great white hope. And after Ray Nagin became disgraced as a result of what happened after Katrina, they saw their chances, and Mitch Landrieu resigned from his position of, instead of trying to become governor of the state, which he was more or less was going to become, instead of Bobby Jindal, and he decided to become mayor, which is really a step down in post, but they had to have a white face in order to take over management and officially take over reign while they go about the regentrification, the privatization of the school systems, making it into all charter in New Orleans. Also, Mary Landrieu, who is the senator that represented that area, she was well aware of the levy system, and she dropped the ball in properly funding and getting the funds into that area where it needs to go. These are white people. She knows because her parents, they live in the Garden District in New Orleans. That's where they are. That's where the Landrieu they live. And it's a bit of on a higher ground, so their area did not get that much water damage. They got some flooding, but not as much as compared to the other areas, because especially along Poydras and Rampart and all of those streets out there, which is closer to the Superdome, and it's right off of the I-10 when you're coming in off New Orleans. It's right there where it's the low-lying area where they experienced a lot of the flooding. But her case, and when she came out there, which is one of the reasons why they wanted to get her out of the Senate, because for the longest time they wanted her to go because she was not doing. All of these people are running on name recognition because of her father and the white connection, the nepotism that's involved in that state. A lot of it is involved in nepotism. As you mentioned earlier in the book, in the foreword, where he mentioned about Harry Connick's father, who held that position as the DA, New Orleans DA, for a very, very long time, almost 40 years. So a lot of these people, they run on name recognition up in that area, and that is how they could be as inept as ever. But because of the family name, they get these positions, and they hold and they maintain the position. And as Mr. Demery Ford stated, with Catholicism having such a strong hold in a majority of the population throughout the entire state of Louisiana, it's a very it's a dominant, predominantly Roman Catholic-based state, especially the largest SWAT you would find them in New Orleans as well as in Lafayette, further down on the I-10 corridor, which is which is called, referred to as Acadiana. Those are where you find the majority of the Catholics in that state, right up there in that area. So that tends to have a big hold on people. And once again, when a lot of us get involved in these religions, especially with the Christianity, it tends to dull our senses, and we tend to look at things, don't quite see things as the way they should. We tend not to see racism when it's staring us in the face. Listening and reading from last week, reading on that in October, and as well as what is being said this week, and how the author in the book is putting up a lot of these black people, like the police officers, the ones in Gretna, as being the ones as being the blockade, who were trying to block these people from crossing the bridge and whatever. And it seems that once again, they want to put show these black people, okay, well, it's not great because there were black people out here who were blocking other black people from crossing, and of course they had to put in the piece in there where the guy with the baby called him Uncle Tom and all of that because he was stopping black people from moving into the city. But along that whole corridor, whether you talk about Gretna, Metairie, Slidell, and if you move further down to La Place, which is in Ascension Parish, going down towards Gonzales, and moving on into Baton Rouge, if you're coming down the I-10 corridor from New Orleans, that whole area up there where they have the so-called Cajuns or the rednecks, as they call them, it's a very violent, it's a very vicious crew when you're coming down that area. You don't want to get caught there. Point Coupee is another area. If you're coming on the other side of Airline Highway, coming through Baton Rouge on that side, there's a place called Point Coupee, New Roads. Those are areas where you do not want to be caught at night dark or with an empty tank of gas trying to stop to fill up your car. You want to fill up in New Orleans or in a place in Baton Rouge and drive on through because you don't want to be caught out there. Because reading all of these things and reading how they treated these black people as non-beings, hunting pheasants, and the way how they treat them, and then trying to shift the blame and put it on them as it being their fault. What are you supposed to do if you're on feet? You don't have transportation. The only way that you can get out is walking on feet. But when you try to walk to go to where they say you can go to get on the buses. You are being blockaded and you are being blocked from entry, and then you're being shot and killed. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation for these people. They were in a no-win position. And now everybody's trying to, with Ray Nagin, and they're trying to blame, in a way, yes, Ray Nagin, I would give him maybe 5% of it, because he being a black man raised in New Orleans, he knew the climate, the condition that he was operating under in there. And he left a very successful executive position to let them talk him into this position to becoming a mayor. Very, very successful young person. And for you to get taken out over trivial things like football tickets and, trips and things like that, and now he is going to be for the next 10 years in Oakdale, the federal prison in Oakdale, where Edwin Edwards, the former governor, he was also in that prison. It shows, how we tend to get suckered into doing these things, that people brush our ego and push us along and tell us that, okay, we can do these things, and we know that it's a setup. We should know in the back of our mind that these people are setting us up and we should not fall for the bait. But back to to Bush and to Brown with FEMA and all of that, and how they try to drop the ball and how they try to Kathleen Blanco, and also with what she did not do as the governor, which is one reason why she did not run for re-election, was another reason, because she saw the handwriting on the wall and she decided to step out and not be bothered after this Katrina debacle. Katrina destroyed a lot of so-called political careers of a lot of politicians who thought themselves was on the rise in the Democratic Party, and it was one of those potential that turned the state of Louisiana completely into a Republican-controlled state as a result of Katrina, because the white people used that within which to take back control of that state, because they had a lot of Democrats, even though they were the so-called blue dogs, the conservative Democrats running things, but it acted as an impetus within which to officially push them out the way, and they officially brought in their Republicans within which to take fully control, because right now they have two Republican state U.S. senators from that state. They have a Republican governor, and it's a completely so-called blue state out there in Louisiana. But I just basically want to touch on that, and, lastly, with the situation with National Guards and with the way how things were going, I'm kind of glad that they which we haven't got to that point yet, where they brought in Lieutenant General Russell Honore, who was a native New Orleanian, and he came in there, and he kind of was the calm that kind of took things down a notch from where it was headed.
Not get too far ahead of the book yet, because we have.
Yes, sorry. That's why I said I don't want to go too far ahead, but I'm going to pause there because we haven't got to that former General Honore, but that's basically it. I don't want to ramble on any further, but yeah, it's really I hate this time of the year, because it's very, very frustrating for me, because when I go back to New Orleans and I go down there and I see how the lower ninth, how the air, you can see the blocks, the steps where houses used to be. It's still sitting there. Grass has grown up and it's not built up. But you go further uptown, you go into the Garden District and all these places, the French Quarters. Everything is great. It's like if the city is not there, and it's whiter than white. I've never seen so much white people in New Orleans, in certain places that you would never expect to see white people. They're all over the doggone place, running their dogs and doing all these crazy things.
Right. That even that is later in the book. Like that is
yes,
coming.
Sir.
How that happened. Appreciate it for good to hear your comments, as well as everybody else that dialed in. If other folks, if you have anything you want to share, dial in. I guess that'll be something, because I know this is something that probably a lot of people have paid a lot of attention to over the years, or at least have some strong connections to images that they saw, if not family members, if you didn't experience it yourself. But I do want to kind of make sure we don't get ahead of the story, kind of stay within where we are narrative-wise with whatever comments we want to bring to the table. But quick things I wanted to point out. I'm in the same boat, because I've been doing a lot of researching and reading on this. So much material. Some of the notes that I put down, Lance Hill has been on the cows. Like, I was reading, I was like, that name is really common. Like, I'm not sure. And I was like, well, wait a minute. Ireland Hill, he was in Louisiana. And I just kept reading, and I was like, this can't be the same guy. And I looked at it, it is the same guy. Like, you can go back. We didn't even talk about Katrina. We talked about his book on the Deacons of Defense, Armed Resistance in the Civil Rights Movement, Deacons of Defense. But that is all the more fascinating. And I mean, just having that in mind, like if I was reading this, would totally think like, oh, this guy is not racist. What a good white guy. And even though his book does have a lot of constructive information about the Deacons of Defense, I got the total impression that he was a racist, and I think I said so on the program. That notwithstanding, I do think his observations, are important in terms of just the way that number one, the white people in the dry area with the air conditioning, like all of that is racism. Like that is the total legacy of racism, and not allowing black people to own property on high ground. So that's, white people end up being up there, and black people disproportionately are down in the low flood vulnerable areas. But his commentary about just the explicit way that white people were behaving and talking about black people, and hey, this is great. This is an opportunity for us. I mean, that is amazing. And I thought it was especially significant when he said, if you were uptown and white right after Katrina, people assumed you were rich. I thought they could have replaced it with a different R word. They assumed you were racist, because it seemed like, hey, yeah, I'm very comfortable. I'm glad these niggas are gone. Hurrah, I washed the trash out of this. It seemed like they just assumed that you would co-sign on that and think that that too is a grand thing if they're talking openly about this. I think this is great too, because this is not, I keep saying, people should not be pointing to, when we talk about racism, like there should never, ever, ever be a need to go and get some old black and white photos or videos or talk about something that happened, slavery and all this other. You can go to 2005, get great Technicolor images, digital video, and show any type of white barbarity you would like. All of it is on display, and some of it very blatantly with this event. And I'm hoping, because I believe Malik Rahim is going to be in the book as well. I didn't want to spoil it and get ahead, but I think he actually is. So I'm eager to see how much detail he gives about the white violence that was taking place in this climate. Some of the other notes that I had quickly, and then if anybody had anything they want to get in. This is a white author, so we want to be keeping that in mind. Is he being accurate with the commentary that we're getting, or things that we think would have sounded differently if this had not been written by a white person. The Ray Nagin, I think it's important. You all were already touching on some of the information, but when he first won the mayor, it was 2002, 80% of the people that voted for him were white. That, is, extremely significant. Why not to keep in mind in terms of who wanted him to be mayor? It was not the black citizens of New Orleans. Now, that totally reversed when he was reelected in 2006, and I'm sure he will get to that later in the book, but I do think that is important in terms of who politically, who was in charge. When we talk about concepts like racial showcasing, this might be a sterling illustration of that. And I mean, wow, particularly when you get to see how this evolved for this victim of racism, Ray Nagin. Some of the other things that I had highlighted. Oh, yeah, I might even ask that. I'll save that for later. I'll ask the question that he starts chapter 3 with. Kind of going through, let's see. Oh, yeah, Eddie Compass. This might be second illustration. He resigned a few weeks after this event, which might also be hopping ahead of the story, because I'm sure that'd be difficult to have this and not explain that, because that was a lot of commentary. That was front page material. But this these allegations, I mean, I read this. This is so common. When he's saying he feared that Negroes were going to burst into the city's floor. I mean, it's laughable. Like, what? But I mean, it's laughable on the one hand, right? But I am also reading 5 Days at Memorial. I said that last week. I'm trying to go over as much material as I can on this, which should help the book study, because I'll be able to add in additional constructive information, hopefully. So I'm reading 5 Days at Memorial, which is about the hospital in New Orleans, formerly Baptist, that they were stuck there with a lot of elderly patients, over 100. I think it was about 2,000 people in total at the hospital, because some of them, they had relatives and staff and security and all that. So, and some just people in the neighborhood came to stay. So it took them about 5 days. It was, I think, like September 1st, September 2nd, before they got everyone out of the facility. And they are talking about being in Memorial Hospital, just for geography, is like close to the Superdome. They had, I think it was maybe 4 feet of flooding outside the hospital. So, I mean, significant, but, you know, it was way, way worse in other areas. So it did flood. They did lose power for 4 or 5 days. They had no power in most of the building, no phone capabilities, sweltering hot. Temperature got up to 100, 110 degrees. So they have a white doctor at Memorial Hospital. He is quoted in the book. I think this is like day 2, day 3, hot, no electricity, blah, blah, blah. So this is what he says. Dr. Theo, this is his name. He says, Theo was sure that another kind of animal was poised to rampage through the hospital looking for drugs. He later recalled wondering at the time, what would they do, these crazy black people who think they've been oppressed for all these years by white people. God knows what these crazy people outside are going to do to these poor patients who are dying. They can dismember them. They can rape them. They can torture them. I will stop there. But I mean, there are tons of anecdotes that sound exactly like what Eddie Compass, like everybody constantly is, oh my God, niggers are going to come and kill her. Oh my God. Like everybody. And I mean, it would be laughable, but I mean, black people died as a result of this. Like, I mean, this was something you'd have to codify a term for, racist delusions, if you just want to call them out and out lies, whatever you want to call it. Black people died as a result of this, whether it was gunning down black people, Danny Brumfield, Ronald Madison, J.J. Brissett, quite a few black people, Henry Glover, shot and killed during this time. And now he said that the rescue services and people who could have come in to help get these people out of this situation to alleviate suffering, they didn't do so because of all of these lies about raping black people and pillaging black people. I mean, it is disgraceful, but in my opinion, that is something that it just has not been talked about at all. This rampant paranoia of crazed Negroes. Like at one point in 5 Days of Memorial, they refer to this period as Night of the Living Dead. At any rate, other things that stood out in this section, I really appreciated, and just for the record, never mind, I think some of that will come. I really appreciated when they gave the specific detail about a lot of the people that were there, the really meager resources that they had. I think that is so important. One of our investors who purchased the book for me, she said that she was excited to read this book because she wanted to learn more about this period of time and that she was confused when this happened. And she said that she kind of remembered blaming the victims, being like, oh my God, why didn't they leave? And they're putting rescuers in danger, having to save them. And, this is just ridiculous. I can't believe they did, which was widespread. A lot of people took that view, expressed that view. I mean, very, very, people, even to this day, very, very common belief. I really appreciated him pointing out just the nothing that these people had, and that a lot of these people, if they were not disabled themselves, they were caring for someone who was disabled. That is huge. And that just totally went out the window. Like, no compassion at all. You had a disproportionate number of elderly people, as he said, disabled people, even a lot of people who just had no resources. I even appreciate that he points out specifically that this happened at the end of the month. And if you have people that have meager resources, a lot of times at the end of the month, you have very little. You're waiting till you kind of get your restart at the beginning of next month. So, I mean, it was just terrible for so many reasons. And just that, as Mr. Demery pointed out, I think it was Scotty Reed who was talking about that earlier, just saying that total lack of compassion for black people, that even in the worst life-threatening situations, we are still seen as niggers, deserving of death. We have about 4 minutes before we get to the second audio portion. The question that I was going to ask about Chapter 3, I was just going to see what people thought about a racist suspect classifying Ray Nagin as, I want to make sure I read it exactly, what he said. He said, yes, Lance Hill wasn't leaving town just because Ray Nagin wasn't leaving town just because Ray Nagin had decreed it. That number one is interesting. 2, if anything, a mandatory evacuation order from Ray Nagin was a reason to stay in New Orleans through Katrina. A black man playing front man for the white establishment, Hill said of Nagin, and one who hadn't bothered helping those without means remove themselves from harm's way. I was going to ask what you all thought about a white person saying that about a victim of racism, but if you have other things that are important, that's fine. But we have 3 minutes, so you can take 40 seconds for your response if you want to answer that question or share something else.
Well, he just showed his racism right there. As it says, a black man is not bound to be respected by a white man, and he laid it out in that piece. Even though it was to save his life, he don't give a damn about it, because a black man is given an order that is grounds for him to refuse it. And this thing about getting raped, you see, white people put their own psychosis onto black people, which comes back to the point of us saying that, okay, that we always think that white people are forgetful. They're not, because the first thing that he wants to say is that we are going to take revenge on them as a result of us, of them being in this vulnerable position. That's the first thing that came to their mind. Their psychosis came to the very top.
40 seconds. Great. Anybody else have something they wanted to get in? Get your 40 seconds.
I have 40 seconds. I can take 40 seconds. I say it over and over and over again. They lie. I mean, it's when a white person opens their mouth to say anything about any black person on the planet, that should be first and foremost, they're lying. They're lying. I mean, it seems to be an incredible weakness for us to understand that they are lying. I don't know why we have to belabor the point all the time. Like, I wonder if they're lying. I wonder if they're telling the truth or not. They're just lying. They lie. Can't say it enough. Sorry. Thanks.
Five, 2, 3, 4. 40 seconds.
Greetings, guys. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I just wanted to say, just in 40 seconds, I agree with 404, and I just wanted to say as well that it shows to me kind of the racism of the author of the book, because it seems like every chance he gets to take a pot shot at some black person who may not act proper during this event, he goes ahead and takes it. And him using this or putting this in the book is just another means of debasing black people once again for the Katrina incident. So I'll meet myself there. Thank you.
Got time? Last one, 40 seconds. Anybody? Great. I assume we are straight. It was, yes, there were black people. That's why I'm left, I've had, and I'm not recommending this for anyone, but I have had to take this position that nobody's testimony in and of itself is credible, because there were tons of white people and there were tons of non-white people who were just saying things that were totally not true. Now, whether And because if it was just white people, I would just be saying, oh, okay, they're lying. But because everybody was doing this. It's probably a combination of things, but at the end of the day, nobody's testimony in and of itself is credible. That's just the conclusion that I've had to take after looking at all of this. Doesn't matter who it is. I don't care political person, what office they are. I wouldn't care who it is. Just because they said they saw this or they think that this happened, it would have to be corroborated evidence. I mean, I don't care what they said. Even the black people who said they heard explosions, that is not credible. Just under these circumstances. The person who called in 9325, did you have 40 seconds worth?
Yes, sir. Yes, I wanted to say quickly that it dawned on me after reading that part that you mentioned, the racist suspect, saying that if Ray Nagin said it's time to evacuate, then everybody should stay. That's a racist remark, but then it shows the position of mayor, of a major city is a position that is something that white people don't take seriously if a black man is in. I guess the same thing with the President of the United States, with President Obama. But what was interesting to me is that the lady who tried to warn him, I guess, that he was being played, her father had been the mayor, years before. And I don't know how much of that you can put weight up on, but it looks like that she was trying to pull his coat on some political maneuvering that was going on.
Right on. And 40, we'll leave it there. We will make sure that way we'll have time after the second audio clip concludes, so folks have other things that they would like to share. Feel free and take notes so that if you have commentary you'd like to share for the second segment of the audio clip. So we are still in Chapter 3. Lance Hill, former guest on the C.O.W.S, is giving his assessment of the white conduct in Uptown, what he was seeing, white people talking overtly about the system of racism, white supremacy. Context of White Supremacy, audio segment number 2. Lance Hill, born in the Midwest, was 12 years old when he wrote a poem about black and white living together in a colorblind world. While still in high school, he worked as a busboy at a local college. There, he organized a strike for higher pay. In 1968, Hill, then 18, the son of a mechanic and a nurse, led an unsuccessful push to integrate the town's swimming pools. He matriculated at Kansas University, but was expelled after one semester for organizing demonstrations in opposition to the Vietnam War. He joined a revolutionary group, read Karl Marx, and went to work in a factory with the aim of politically awakening its employees. In the early to mid-1970s, a lot of people in the anti-war student movement started to look at the industrial working classes as the agents of change, Hill said. That's where I ended up. Hill worked a series of jobs in Kansas City as a machinist, a welder, a printer, all in the name of inspiring a broader movement among the country's blue-collar masses. At night and on the weekends, he read books about labor history and other social movements, including those on the right. That's when he started reading about the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups that together would become the focus of his scholarship. In 1979, Hill and fellow political activist Aline San Juan arrived in Louisiana. The couple's first stop was Hammond, a blue-collar town 60 miles north of New Orleans, where Hill found work as a welder in a local shipyard. The job served as a harsh introduction to some of the differences between the Midwest and the Deep South. In Kansas City, he had always enjoyed lunch at the welding shop where he worked. The neo-Nazis and the black nationalists and the lunch bucket whites sat at the same long table, eating and arguing and ribbing one another over their beliefs. In Hammond, black and white ate separately. In a shipyard that employed hundreds, he never saw a black person in a supervisory position. Whites still casually used the N-word. Hill stood 6'3" and weighed almost 300 pounds. People who didn't like his politics just left him alone, but it didn't go unnoticed when he started giving a ride home to a black coworker. After 2 years in Hammond, Aline was offered a job teaching in the Orleans parish schools. The couple, along with their son and Hill's 2 stepchildren, moved into a trailer park in the New Orleans suburbs. Hill said he had lost faith in this grand theory that socialism would come through the working class. He started a grass-cutting business to bring extra money and returned to school to earn his college degree. Back on a college campus, Hill threw himself into any number of popular causes, including the nuclear freeze movement and the fight against apartheid in South Africa. His obsession, however, remained white supremacists, and the New Orleans metro area proved fertile ground for study. A neo-Nazi group was based in Kenner, near the airport. In nearby Metairie, a white flight suburb that saw its population soar in the 1960s and 70s, he found a group calling itself the National Association for the Advancement of White People, a name chosen as a deliberate jab at the NAACP. Hill subscribed to the newsletter of each group and even visited the offices of the NAAWP. Posing as a sympathizer, he met the group's leader, David Duke. A budding historian, Hill would save and catalog the materials sent to him by Duke's group. Hill began working toward his Ph.D. at Tulane in 1987. The next year, David Duke announced that he was running for a seat in the state legislature. Duke had been a grand wizard in the Ku Klux Klan, and his new group, the NAAWP, preached racial superiority. Yet in seeking to represent the western suburbs in the Louisiana House of Representatives, Duke fashioned himself as a mainstream Republican opposed to affirmative action and higher taxes and in favor of the mandatory drug testing of welfare recipients. Duke won that election and 2 years later shocked pundits when he captured 58% of the statewide white vote in a run for the U.S. Senate. Duke lost that election but was again in the national spotlight a year later when he ran for Louisiana governor. Duke made the runoff in the race. Hill was among those behind a group called the Louisiana Coalition Against Racism and Nazism, created to pressure mainstream Republicans into opposing Duke. Duke lost his bid for the governorship, but again won a majority of the state's white vote. The years following Duke's failed gubernatorial run were gratifying ones for Hill, even if not quite as glamorous. He earned a doctorate in history and co-founded in 1993 the Southern Institute for Education and Research at Tulane. At this center dedicated to the improvement of race relations, Hill and others developed a tolerance curriculum used to train teachers throughout the Deep South. A dozen years later, Hill, 54, was preparing for a heavy calendar of training sessions for the upcoming academic year when Katrina hit. For most people in New Orleans, the days after Katrina were a harrowing experience. In Broadmoor, a mixed-race community in the western half of the city, a lawyer named Bill Hines was trapped in his home, surrounded by water, with his son, his brother-in-law, and a Tulane student. They numbered 11 by the time a boat rescued them 4 frightening and sweltering days later. You had the guns going off at night, and looters were coming by in boats, said Hines, the managing partner at the city's largest law firm. It was Lord of the Flies. Yet Hines knows they were among the lucky ones. In the lower Ninth Ward, Robert Green Sr. was trapped with his family in a home that the floodwaters had pushed off its foundation. He lost his mother and 3-year-old granddaughter. He had to watch both of them die right in front of him, his pastor later reported. Yet for Hill, who had no idea of the disaster taking place elsewhere around the city, those first days after Katrina were more a swashbuckling adventure. We were completely cut off, Hill said. I basically ended up adopting this group of nice old ladies who didn't want to evacuate because they had pets. On Wednesday, the National Guard and other outside police agencies started going door to door in Uptown, encouraging anyone still in town to leave. That caused old people to think they needed to hide, Hill said, which was the last worst thing you could do with midday temperatures in the 90s. At the homes of people who had shuttered themselves in, he would blow a whistle, yell, "I'm leaving water on your porch," before heading to the next stop. Hill learned about the travesty unfolding at the convention center while chatting with people he met on the street. On Friday morning, he drove to this massive facility only a few miles from his apartment, where he found several blocks of people standing 5 and 10 deep, looking in vain for help. People tried to get me to take older folks and children not doing well to the hospital, he said. I had to explain that all the hospitals were closed, even those in Uptown. Seeing the phalanx of armed soldiers who had stationed themselves across the street infuriated him. The soldiers stood at a distance as if there only to keep order rather than to help. Hill remembers one white guardsman standing in the middle of the street, refreshing himself with a long slug of water. The soldier in full uniform and carrying a heavy rifle was no doubt thirsty, but he seemed oblivious of all the people, nearly all of them black, watching him. He's drinking in front of all these parents with babies and young children screaming from extreme dehydration, Hill said. He doesn't see the hordes of dark-skinned people as quite human, Hill thought to himself. This sight of so much suffering caused Hill to shift into high gear of super activism. He couldn't save the sick, but at least he could distribute water. He drove his family's venerable Oldsmobile to the western suburbs, where the main thoroughfares were clear and some of the big box stores were open. The car was a wide boat with a massive back seat and large trunk, perfect for carrying cases of bottled water. Hill spray-painted the word aid on the doors and added a few red crosses, and later had to phone his father. How do you remove spray paint from a car? The challenge was getting back into the city. He had his laptop with him along with a portable printer and a voltage converter, allowing him to set up a veritable office in the back seat. Using official Tulane-issued stationery, he said, I wrote a letter addressed to myself, giving myself permission to be in the city, tending to property damage. Arriving at a checkpoint behind the wheel of an older car with a throaty muffler, missing hubcaps, and leopard design seat covers, Hill aimed for nonchalance. He pretended to be chatting on his cell phone as he handed over his made-up letter and ID to a boy soldier. The guardsman didn't know what to make of the scene and phoned his commander. Captain, I think we have the president of Tulane here. Hill was allowed back in the city. Hill made several runs to the convention center, delivering around 20 gallons of water at a time. A contingent of rifle-wielding soldiers tried to stop him from emptying his load. They backed off, he said, only after confronted by shouts from the crowd. He had just finished emptying his fourth load when a pair of officers driving a civilian truck pulled behind him a block or two from the convention center. One was a New Orleans cop, the other a Louisiana state trooper. They're yelling for me to stop, but I'm pretending not to hear them and just drive faster, Hill said. He stopped only after one of the cops fired a warning shot. Hill bolted out of his car as if ready for a fight. What the fuck do you think you're doing? The state trooper yelled. What the fuck are you doing? Hill yelled back. In the suburbs, Hill had passed a fleet of ambulances sitting idle, while at the convention center, hundreds of hungry and thirsty people surrounded him. Some seemed in dire need of medical attention. "There's 20,000 people that you're supposed to protect and serve," he yelled, "and you're sitting in an air-conditioned truck doing nothing." They let him go, but with a warning. "Don't let me see you here again," one of the cops barked at him. Almost a party atmosphere prevailed along St. Charles Avenue after the flood, a bubble inhabited by people tromping around in cutoffs and flip-flops. It wasn't uncommon to be offered a cold beer despite a citywide blackout. Each day, Hill made it a point to stop by Audubon Place, where he spoke to the black-clad Israeli commandos that the Audubon Place Homeowners Association had helicoptered in for protection. "They kept me up to date on what was going on in the rest of town," Hill said. Sometimes the comments Hill heard while making the rounds were overtly racist. He watched as two white men thanked a white National Guardsman for helping to protect their city. "Now, if you can just keep the blacks from coming back," one called out. But mainly Hill's time passing as a member of the tribe revealed more of a general good riddance as they learned details of the disaster taking place in the eastern half of the city. It was impossible not to pick up on this sentiment that this was our chance to take back control of the city, Hill said. There was virtually a near consensus among whites that authorities should not do anything to make it easy for poor African Americans to come back. People eventually figured out that Hill wasn't one of them. Maybe it was the way he elongated his words or his habit of averting his eyes upwards as he spoke, as if delivering a lecture in the classroom. Yet rather than shunning him, they made more of an effort to make me feel comfortable, Hill said. For some, his association with Tulane increased his stock. Others no doubt noticed this adopted member of their tribe caring for some of their older neighbors. It helped, too, that Hill was handy with tools and comfortable around machinery. One blue blood, Ashton O'Dwyer, a prominent lawyer in town with a big house on St. Charles, even stopped by Hill's apartment building, where he left a message with Hill's wife. O'Dwyer was having trouble with his generator and had heard that Hill might be able to help. Could Hill stop by his place on St. Charles? O'Dwyer was hard to miss after Katrina. The silk-stocking lawyer wrote Jed Horn, then the city editor of the Times-Picayune, who had taken up a sentinel's post on St. Charles Avenue. O'Dwyer had dragged a black wrought-iron table to his driveway, and there, with a shotgun visible, he sat watching a small portable television. A jowly man with short-clipped steel-gray hair and thin lips set into a permanent frown, he offered visitors ice cubes for their drinks. That was where Hill found him around a week after Katrina hit. Christopher Cooper of the Wall Street Journal was also there the day Hill showed up to fix O'Dwyer's generator. Old line families escape worst of flood and plot the future, read a headline on the front page of the Wall Street Journal 10 days after Katrina. Cooper, who had spent a decade in New Orleans working for the Picayune before going to the Journal, began the article by describing O'Dwyer dressed in nothing but a blue bathing suit, dipping a pair of plastic milk jugs into a neighbor's swimming pool for water to flush his toilet. The mostly African-American neighborhoods of New Orleans are largely underwater, Cooper reminded his readers, and its residents scattered across the country. Yet the people living in the fashionable districts surrounding St. Charles Avenue, the kings and queens of Carnival, many who have ancestors who arrived here in the 1700s, were maneuvering to play a central role in the recovery. New Orleans is ready to be rebuilt, O'Dwyer said. Let's start right here. O'Dwyer uttered those words, Cooper wrote, standing in his expansive kitchen next to a counter covered with a jumble of weaponry. The next person Cooper quoted was Jimmy Reese. I might have spoken to the guy for all of 2 minutes, Reese said of his conversation with Cooper. But that was enough. In the months and years ahead, it wouldn't be the image of O'Dwyer in his swim trunks, nor his words that Hill and the drive time hosts on Black Talk Radio would repeat, but those few thoughts Jimmy Reese shared with Cooper about the recovery. He told us everything that was going to happen before it did, Hill said. Like O'Dwyer, Rice was a product of old money New Orleans, except Rice was wealthier, better looking, and enjoyed a higher perch on the city's social ladder. He was New Orleans royalty, invited into the family business after earning his MBA at Tulane. A charming rapscallion with twinkly blue eyes and a well-earned reputation within his social set as a ladies' man, Reese had taken a bachelor pad in the French Quarter and seemed determined not to follow his father and his father's father into the wholesale candy business that his great-grandfather had started a century earlier. I was trying to drink and fuck myself to death, and doing a pretty good job of it, Reese said, and my father asked me to leave. Reese and a fishing buddy started a business selling fire suppression equipment to offshore oil rigs and shipbuilders in the area. Eventually, they got into the electronics business, selling specialized automation and control systems to large businesses. A large multinational bought their company, and then Reese, who had stayed on as a division president after the sale, bought back the company with a loan from the Whitney Bank, which had been taking care of the uptown elite since his great-grandfather's time. That's when I made the bulk of my fortune, Reese said. Reese had elected to ride out the storm at a second home he owned in Aspen, Colorado. A week after Katrina, he hired a helicopter to fly him into the city. Reese was in his mid-60s when Katrina hit, yet his friends all said it. He was the same Jimmy they knew growing up, naughty and outspoken, the man at the cocktail party who made people laugh by uttering what decorum dictated be kept to oneself. But this Jimmy owned a big house on Audubon Place and was one of the best connected people in New Orleans. Sally Foreman was a young mom when she volunteered for an organization Reese co-chaired called Dollars for Scholars. Foreman watched with awe at Reese's gift for convincing the wealthy of Uptown to write big checks for their cause. Reese sat on the Tulane Board of Trustees and ran the Business Council, an organization made up of most of the city's top CEOs. He was even nominally a member of the Nagin administration as the chairman of the city's Regional Transit Authority, an agency with 1,300 employees and a $110 million budget. Reese and Nagin had met late on the Friday night before the storm. In retrospect, they should have been talking about running more buses that weekend to shuttle people out of town, but they stuck to the agenda, the city's crime problem. Only Camden, New Jersey had a higher homicide rate than New Orleans in 2004. Property crimes had soared under Nagin, yet rather than offer any solutions, Reese said the mayor vented about the city's substandard schools and an unemployment rate among black men that hovered around 50%. Their meeting broke up at around 8 p.m. Reese started phoning friends and other members of the business council in the days after Katrina. The city's crime rate, the lousy schools, the unemployment, and maybe even the mayor's lackadaisical attitude toward these social ills were a topic of almost every conversation. By the time Cooper phoned, Reese figured he had probably spoken to 40 business leaders. They were all fed up, Reese told Cooper. New Orleans would need to be a city with fewer poor people and better run services if people, such as himself, were going to participate in the recovery efforts. Those who want to see this city rebuilt want to see it done in a completely different way, demographically, geographically, and politically, Reese said. I'm not just speaking for myself here. The way we've been living is not going to happen again, or we're out. In time, Hill would dub it the exclusionist movement, the efforts by some within the white community to prevent the city's poor from returning. A large portion of the city's black community had been given one-way tickets out of town to places hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away, often with nothing but a garbage bag of belongings. You had this old-line economic elite reassert their position of dominance the moment the city flooded, Hill said. It was like I was watching them revert to their original state. Chapter 4. A burst of optimism. At 9 a.m. on the first Sunday after Katrina, Liberty Bank's jack of all trades, Russell Labb, pulled into the parking lot of an International House of Pancakes just outside Baton Rouge. Labb had driven from Lafayette 1 hour to the west in a brown 2005 Ford pickup truck he had bought a couple months earlier. At IHOP, he met Joe James, who had driven from Alberta Springs 1 hour to the east. The two men had known each other for years, but if they had said 10 words by way of greeting on this morning, Labb would be surprised. We were anxious to get going, he said. James oversaw Liberty's computer operations and would be going with Labb into the city. James buckled himself into the passenger seat of Labb's truck, and the two drove south and east to New Orleans. Water still covered much of the city, but they also both knew that the bank's odds of survival depended on their picking up the computer tapes and other items they needed to get the bank back on the interbank network. They made their first stop at a McDonald's on the other side of Baton Rouge to meet Arthur Morrell. A black legislator and a friend of the bank's, he represented the black middle-class enclave of Gentilly. Morrell would ensure that Labb and James had no trouble getting through the checkpoints set up around New Orleans. A deputy sheriff rode shotgun next to Morrell. Both were carrying a gun, as was Labb, but not James. "Follow me," said Morrell, who was towing the boat they would need to reach the bank's headquarters. The interstate was quiet. They encountered water on their drive, but only when the highway dipped. The first checkpoint they encountered was at the Bonnie Carey Spillway, a dozen miles west of New Orleans. The soldiers had parked their vehicles to pinch traffic to a single lane. Morrell flashed his credentials and explained that the people in the truck behind him were with him. They encountered no trouble at that roadblock or any other along the way. The first detour came at the split in the highway that would take them to the eastern half of the city. Several feet of water prevented them from taking the turnoff for the east, forcing them to take a circuitous route. They encountered their first long delay a couple miles east of downtown. The elevated highway was being used as an impromptu landing pad to refuel rescue helicopters. Labb and Joe James stepped out of the truck, walked to the highway embankment, and looked at the water still covering much of the city. "What's that over there?" James asked, pointing at the water. A body was floating face down, and then they noticed the National Guardsmen were fishing bodies out of the water. They had 4 or 5 bodies stacked up and ready to be shipped out, Labb said. Their contingent reached the edge of New Orleans at a little past noon. The police had set up an impromptu marina at the edge of the water with a small armada of borrowed boats. Morrell knew several of the cops. "Take your pick," one offered. Abandoning the smaller boat they had towed, the 4 of them rowed in a 16 or 18-footer piloted by a New Orleans police officer. The water was as deep as 12 feet, but they still needed to follow the road grid to avoid rooftops and second stories. When they reached Liberty's headquarters, Labb navigated them to the back of the building. There, a set of metal stairs led to a back door a few feet above the waterline. In different circumstances, Labb might have tried phoning the man they had hired to stay with the building to let them in, but cell phones were not working. Labb grabbed the 2x4 he had brought with him and smashed the glass part of the door. They tied the boat to the staircase, and everyone except the police officer went inside. There was no power. The sun outside was bright, but inside the building it was gloomy and dark. Labb's eyes were still adjusting to the change in light when he heard breaking glass. He looked over to see the deputy sheriff, who had accompanied them on their journey, smashing windows with the 2x4. "What are you doing?" Labb yelled. The deputy asked Labb to feel the moisture in the air. You need to get some cross-ventilation going or you're losing this building, the deputy said. Lab later said the deputy had probably saved them from writing off the building as a total loss. Lab and James headed for the third-floor computer room, relieved to find it dry and the mainframe looking pristine. James found the computer tapes they needed and grabbed other equipment that he thought they might need in Baton Rouge. Lab left him and checked the rest of the building. Except for some water damage near a few windows broken by the wind, everything seemed as it should be. The guard they had hired to watch the building had somehow made it out on his own. Back on the boat, the group headed a couple of miles deeper into New Orleans East to check on the bank's old headquarters and the branch next door. They could do nothing but shake their heads over a pair of buildings with 6 feet of water inside. Doubling back the way they had come, the police officer motored through Lake Forest Estates, Alden McDonald's subdivision. There, the water was still so high that the only clue that cars were parked along the streets was the occasional antenna poking up. Once back on dry land, they doubled back the way they had come. After a few miles, they jogged north and west to look at Gentilly. Liberty had another 2 branches in the area. It was also where Lab lived. They found water inside both of Liberty's branches in the area, but Lab discovered that he and his wife were among the lucky ones. Their house was built on a slight ridge. Their home, set up a few feet on a foundation, had been spared. During those first weeks after Katrina, Alden McDonald worked when he wasn't sleeping. He arrived at the southern branch before 9 a.m., driving the putty-colored minivan that he chose from the scant inventory the car rental company was offering. He sometimes had cell phone coverage in those first days after the storm, but often he didn't, which made for a frustrating half-hour drive each morning. That was prime time to call the East Coast, where it was 1 hour earlier, or to steal a few private moments with Raisha. The workday ended well after 9 p.m., if not later. Nothing proved easy during those first weeks. McDonald may have had the foresight to outfit the southern branch with an extra 10 phone lines to handle diverted customer service calls, but he had not counted on the telephone companies being overwhelmed by service calls. So many businesses and people had relocated to Baton Rouge that it took Bell South until the second Thursday after Katrina, 10 days after the storm, to re-rate the bank's customers to its 1-800 lines. Putting together even a skeletal crew meant finding a place to live for each additional employee McDonald brought on, this in a city where every hotel was sold out. In some cases, it wasn't just employees, but entire families, McDonald said. And it wasn't just for a matter of finding them housing, but also paying them an extra stipend to cover their cost. Post-storm, even a modest apartment could cost a displaced employee thousands of dollars a month. You need to worry about how they're going to cover their expenses, McDonald said. You have to make sure their families will be all right. McDonald had around 20 people helping him in those first weeks after Katrina. Most worked in the open office space in the back of the southern branch. The bank's loan department comprised 2 people sitting in mismatched chairs at a folding table. Next to them sat the one-person department assigned the task of figuring out which homeowners with a Liberty loan had flood insurance and which did not. 4 tables pushed together in the middle of the room served as a makeshift call center. Even with the extra phone lines, customers had to listen to busy signals for hours before getting through. Some callers were worried about past due bills. Liberty granted every customer affected by the storm a 4-month grace period on home and car payments, while others called to see about a bump in the limit on a Liberty-issued credit card. Desperate to know how much money they had, many phoned for an account balance, not realizing the bank itself didn't know. Several times a day, a car pulled into the parking lot driven by someone coming from Houston or Dallas or somewhere else far away. They were customers worried about the large sum of money they still owed on a seemingly worthless house or a car or business, who had driven a half a day or more in the hope that someone could answer their questions. MacDonald himself set up a shop at a small table in a windowless conference room. Piles of cardboard boxes lined the floor in this space, which doubled as the bank's records room. MacDonald had a door, but it usually remained open. Every minute or two, someone else would be seeking guidance or passing along a message. He had 2 cell phones, and often one would ring while he was already talking on the other. The bank's chief operating officer had resigned earlier that year, and Liberty was without a chief financial officer. MacDonald, who was doing the job of 3 people, seemed to be in perpetual motion, bouncing between the main room, the branch lobby, and his own office, where only occasionally did he allow himself to sit exhausted in his chair and do nothing before the inevitable next request for his attention. At around 7 p.m. each evening, MacDonald convened a small group in his office for what he called my daily crisis management meeting. MacDonald, a practicing Catholic, prayed. I said to myself, Lord, you have to help me out here, because I'm not 100% sure we're going to make it. Context of White Supremacy. That is where we will pick up at next week. We're almost at the end of chapter 4, so hopefully we'll pick back up next week. Folks hopefully are getting some constructive information, and will stick with us as we progress through the text. For people that would like to participate, the number to dial, 641-715-3640. The code 564-943#. Press star 6 if you would like to participate. Please do not wait till the last minute. If you think you have something you want to share, something you might want to touch on, even if it doesn't come to you until a little bit later. If you think you might want to participate, go ahead and get your hand up so we don't have people waiting until the very last minute to chime in. With that, everybody who dialed in with a hand up should be with us. Again, just want to emphasize, if we can keep our commentary to what is being discussed, and even not hopping ahead, because this book does not just focus on the first week of Katrina. That's not even the bulk of it. Most of it is on what happened over the last 10 years. So I would venture to say most of the things that people want to bring up and talk about and how this evolved over the time is going to come up in the book at some point. So we can point that out as we go. So we can just confine it to what was actually discussed in the portion of the book that we cover. Thank you. So everybody dialed in with a hand up should be with us. Feel free to chime in.
Yes, ma'am, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to bring up the point that I don't think anybody mentioned. I dropped a call, and I didn't hear part of the commentary, so if somebody mentioned it, I didn't know. But the Homeowners Association had called in the Israeli commandos, for protection. I mean, it seems as though the white people, well, it's not that it seemed. What it was is white people was more concerned with protecting their property than they were with aiding or trying to alleviate any suffering from this hurricane. But this guy, Reese, I was thinking, why would the author take time to tell us all about this rich guy that had all these homes and how he made his million and this and that? And the basic thing is that he was voicing the opinion of most of the wealthy whites that was in New Orleans at the time, and they did not want the black people. They wanted a new New Orleans after all this was over, and they wanted to be absent of the poor black people or black people in general. That's all I can come up with on why he would mention this Reese guy anyway. And I had already mentioned that I don't think that everything that Mr. McDonald had gone through, working 12, 16 hours a day, and all the stuff he did to try to maintain his bank, that would have happened if we were talking about white people and their money. But, I'll mute my line and give somebody else a chance. One other thing I have to say is that I ordered a couple of more books concerning this because, I was so shocked on what I'm reading about Ray Nagin that I wanted to order his book, I guess, Katrina Secrets, so that I could get his side of the story, just to be fair. And then also that one book that you mentioned that we'll do off the air. But I'll mute my line. Thanks for taking the call.
For sure. Sherry Fink wrote the book that I'm reading, Memorial. She is white, so I definitely don't encourage folks purchase, if you got to get it, get it used so that you're not bankrolling her. That is a very popular book, so it's at the library too. But if you want it for your personal, try to minimize the number of coins that you have to fork over for her if you want to check that one out too. And the Israeli mercenaries that were brought in for security, that just came up in the second audio segment. You didn't hear it brought up the first time because we just heard it. Any of the other folks who dialed in with a hand up, do you have commentary you want to share as well?
Can I first?
Yes, sir, if you could speak up a bit.
Thomas Smith from New York again. Yeah, that Israeli mercenary, man. They went out and got the best. They wasn't playing. Yeah, that stood out to me too. And I just wanted to say, man, this author, and I found a lot of white authors, they could this is very vivid. They could vividly write about black tragedies. I mean, they do such a great and vivid job, of telling the story. I mean, it's very graphic. And I'm going to continue listening to the book. Thank you.
All right, on. I wanted to get into the reason he went into the detail, even though I do think it's interesting to look at the way he presents all that. But the reason that he described this guy, and I think the reason that he spent time, that Wall Street Journal piece was huge. That was so taught. I don't even know what to compare it to in terms of a piece on Katrina with as much attention as was focused on Katrina. That piece came out early. I think that piece came out in September. I think the floodwater was still in the city when that piece came out. It was huge. Everybody was talking about it. It's like he said, black people were talking about it. It caused such a big to-do at the time that I suspect that, a lot of people who read the book, they will remember that. I suspect a lot of white people in particular, they would definitely remember, and I suspect even a good number of black people would remember because it was huge when that came out. Other folks who hadn't shared yet, did you all have commentary?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I wanted to go back to the first section that you read because I came in fairly late during the reading, but at one point you had read about George Bush praising the head of FEMA for doing such a great job. And to me, that just came across as codified language because now looking at all the destruction and death that they caused in hindsight, basically he was telling them, you not helping these black people is a great job. And that's the way it came across to me. And then another thing that stood out in this particular portion of the reading was the difference in mindset. while all of these white people were going out of their way to basically eradicate blacks from the area, I'm looking at the brother, Mr. McDonald, who owned the bank, and how he went out of his way. He did so many things to try and make sure people were treated with equity. And to me, that says volumes, because in the midst of a situation like that, the average person you would expect to be very unscrupulous, like we see all these white people doing. And this black man is doing everything possible and overextending himself to try and make sure that people are treated in an equitable fashion and treated with respect and trying to answer their questions. And to me, that speaks to just the way that we are naturally when in crisis versus the way whites are naturally when in crisis. And thank you very much. I'll leave my line there.
Wow. I don't know. I can only say, man, there are a lot of examples of black people not doing that during this event, unfortunately. I don't know if how much he's going to bring out in that, but a lot of those enforcement officers on the Danziger Bridge were black people who gunned down Ronald Madison and James Brissett and those other black people on that bridge. Eddie Compass, black enforcement official. It was a lot of black, some would even say Condoleezza Rice. It was a lot of black people who did not demonstrate a natural inclination to do right towards other black people during that time period.
May I say something?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that, like you always say, those black people who are the most confused are the ones who are deliberately sought out and showcased. So I think that we see a disproportionate amount of black people doing bad things or wrong things because they've been put in those positions just because of their confusion.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Going over to backtrack a little on the first reading as well as with this particular reading, and with Lance Hill, Mr. Deacons for Defense, and reading over his beginning, his background, and where he got his start from. And, they want to showcase another white savior, another do-good white man who started off at 12 and trying to organize the black people and was a member of the communists. This is starting to read somewhat similar to the Weather on the Ground people that came along with the Black Panthers back in the 60s, early 70s. It's starting to get that sort of vibe to it, as well as similar to in the biography of Madiba and with Joe Slovo and all of them, the communist people are trying to help the black people. It is starting to get that familiar ring to it, listening to his narrative and how he got started and was driving home with a black co-worker and how white people didn't like him because he was hanging out with the black people and all of this other nonsense. And then to read the part that you read, that's where we left off on the last reading, where
you're
he
breaking
said,
up a little bit.
Okay, I'm sorry. Is it better now?
Can you all? Is that just me, or can you all hear her? Sounds like she's breaking up to me.
Is that any better?
I hear her clearly.
Okay.
I can hear.
Oh, it might be me. Let's see.
Oh. Is it okay now? Gus?
Yes.
Okay, maybe it might be Gus' phone. I don't know, because I had to get off that HD line. I tried to call an HD line and it was giving me problems, so I had to use the regular dial-in number. No, but what I was stating with Lance Hill, when he was at the beginning, when they were giving his background in the second reading, and they were trying to make him out as this very good white guy who came from humble beginnings, and he pulled himself up by the bootstrap, took himself through school at a later date in life and got his PhD and did all of this, blah, blah, blah. But then where you left off with the first reading, where he referred to Ray Nagin, where the mayor of the city, a black man, was calling for the evacuation, and how his racism popped its head out. White people, it would always come out and show you exactly how they feel about you, even though they're going to try and pretend all of this stuff that we are, I'm not like that, I'm a good white person and all this other nonsense. But the mayor gives the evacuation order, and his thing was to blow him off or flip him off. Hey, I'm not listening to that nigga. I'm going to do whatever the heck I want to do as a white man. But to get back to what in the last reading where people were saying, okay, well, why these black people that don't leave, they don't need to come back to New Orleans, it's below sea level, it's another big hurricane is going to come through, it's going to wash them away. You don't hear this thing being said about white people who live in disaster areas where they have massive mudslides. Fires are always going on, like in California, upstate in the northwestern part, where they get these burns and these fires every year and these mudslides, and as well as in Tornado Alley in the Midwest. These people, they get blown away by tornadoes. The insurance company gives them money, and they build right back up in that same area. Nobody ever tells them, but you know what, y'all need to move. This is a bad location for you all. Same thing goes with flooding. Other parts of the country where people have flooding, they get flooded out, they get repaid, overcompensated for what they claim they lost. The bill is right back, bigger and better. Nobody ever tells them that they have to leave because they're white. But here it is with black people, this disaster happened, and the first thing they want to tell you, you need to leave everything, your land, your possession, everything that you've had in you for generations. You're supposed to just up and leave it there and just walk away. But they're not telling that to white people who over and over again, and they know where they live, it's a bad area, and they need to move. But it's okay for them to stay there and rip off the government over and over again to get reimbursed. But for black people, a one-time incident, we can't do that. And the situation you mentioned in the hospital where this doctor was talking about black people coming up in there and raping the patients and stealing drugs and all of that, they're talking about their psychosis. See, white people have a way of deflecting onto their victims what is in their mindset, what they think about themselves, and what's always uppermost in their mind. It's always violence, sex, and killing. That the last thing anybody would have on their mind in a disaster where it's flooded out, there's no water, no electricity, they're trying to get their people to safety, is to come into a hospital and rape people on life support systems. That's the last thing would be in anybody else's mind to do. But only a diabolical, evil person as a white people would think like that, because that's what they would do. So because that is something that they would do, they want to deflect it and put it onto their victims to say, this is what we would do in a similar situation. Well, that's the last thing on anybody else's mind is to get sick. There's if you're in sludge, you're in filth, and the last thing you're going to be thinking about is to have sex or to rape somebody. That's the last thing on anybody else's mind. I'll pause here and let somebody else get in, because this is ridiculous.
Hey, can I add? I agree. I don't think anybody else in the world other than white people would be thinking, let's rape some people that's on life support right now. It's the flood. And I agree with her. And when you read their history, that's exactly what it shows, is that type of behavior all around the board. And another thing I wanted to ask the other callers is if they recall watching footage of this on television back when, they did not give me the impression that there were people walking around in a certain part of the city in flip-flops and it was just like a regular day. I mean, they made it seem like the whole city was in peril. Everyone had to go, whites and blacks. They didn't make it just seem, the media is just as responsible for what happened as anyone, I think. But I don't know if anyone else remembers that. I don't remember them making it seem like, there was parts of the city that people were in and it was just everyday loudly done where, do you remember that, Gus? I know you were in Hawaii, but does any other callers remember that?
Yes, I can say that. Actually, I was overseas when this actually happened. I came back the month of August, and I saw it on TV, and I was under the impression, with limited knowledge about it, is that the whole city was in turmoil and underwater. So I don't remember seeing any scenes where they were in the French quarters drinking beer and walking around with flip-flops.
I agree. They made it seem like the whole city was underwater, and there was no place that was like that at all. It just seemed like the whole Louisiana was completely inundated from the news that I got on the East Coast in New Jersey. So definitely I agree. That's not an impression that I was given at all. And just to piggyback off of what 404 said, she's absolutely right. It's almost like what black people refuse to do, white people do automatically, which is they project, first of all, they're projecting their psychopathology onto black people, but then they go to the most extreme cases of sick, behavior, and they try to put it on black people, but in reality they're talking about themselves. And that's something that we as black people don't do. We tend to look at white people as, it's the Jesus Christ syndrome, the white beauty syndrome, and then we give them the benefit of the doubt, while that kind of behavior we basically attribute to our own kind, whereas white people do the same thing as far as projecting, but they're speaking about themselves.
Exactly. Because James Baldwin, he did a very good clip when he was on the Dick Cavett show, talking about how white people, whatever they conceive, the most violence that they conceive about black people, they're really talking about themselves. In actuality, they're speaking about themselves, but they're just deflecting or projecting it onto their victims, because that is how they get to whatever conscience they might have to get to sleep good at night, is by they're projecting all of their vileness onto their victim in order to justify the mistreatment that they do to their people, they do to the victims. That is how they get to absolve their conscience and get to sleep good at night. Because this whole thing, and as you said, the media, which is CIA intelligence control, the fourth branch of the government. They are here primarily in order to facilitate the government and to carry out, because everything that they do with black people, they always project 99.9% when they focus on us is negative. And they might throw in a good thing every once in a while, but it's going to be a quick blur. But everything is about negative, because they have to keep demonizing you in their medium and project it globally, so to justify, so that when all of their comrades, their tribe members globally, when they see what's being done and they see us in this negative light, they would say, okay, that these people are justified in being mistreated, because this is how they behave. This is how they script their whole narrative in the media. Because, as you said, all of New Orleans was not on the water. But that's the image they give in order to evacuate the city, exactly so that they could come in, do an assessment, and decide what it is that they want to do, what is going to be placed where, when they go ahead and they regentrify and they whiten up the city, and in order to keep the black people out. Because I remember I did Red Cross volunteer when all of this was taking place. I did a whole lot of Red Cross volunteering, and I flew back into New Orleans back in August of 2006 when I came back in there, and I was just shocked when I came back and I saw the devastation in the city a year later when I came back in there. It was atrocious, and it was to me, a lot of it was done intentionally and on purpose, because a lot of the people that I spoke to, because a lot of them that came from New Orleans, they came to Atlanta, and a lot of them decided to stay there instead of coming back. And a lot of them have told about what they heard and the destruction. And even though parts of the white community got inundated with water, but that is just a part of the collateral damage that came in, so that white people could say, okay, well, it's not what you think. We didn't blow up anything because of white people in St. Bernard Parish and over here in Jefferson Parish and all of these other areas. They also got flooded out too. But these were also like so-called poor white trash that, in essence, I guess they wanted to wash them out too and push them further out. But these were just collateral damage that were done, but the majority of black people lost pretty much everything that they have. And up to right now, they're still trying to do tax sale with lots that have been abandoned, and people that have not come back and clear the debris and do whatever needs to be done. They're doing sheriff sales, and they're trying to sell off those lots for dirt cheap. And I keep telling people, if you have property in New Orleans, you got to get your behind on back out there, pay whatever taxes that you have, even though you haven't built anything on it, pay the taxes, because they're going to come in and they're going to sell your stuff at sheriff's sale, because they've been doing it for the past 10 years.
I would like to point out, too, that the author kept saying that Lab had a gun on him every time he went into the city of New Orleans, and when they were in the boat, they were escorted by police. It would give somebody the impression that there were people that were lurking around, looking to kill you or take anything that you had. I get the impression that you got a lot of victims here that don't even have food and water. And, if they're not floating down the middle of the street, then they're all in the Superdome or in some area crowded with no bathrooms and no water and food. So where's all the criminals and the people that's lurking around to take everything you have and to harm peaceful citizens? I don't get it, really.
It was the law enforcement. Because the law enforcement, they had full reign of the city. And when you abandoned and you left out of there, they had free reign to go in there and steal and rip you up. Same thing like what they did in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when they bombed and burned those black people out. They went up in there when people were on the run, and they went into their houses and they looted and they pillaged. Just like they also saw with black people looting and pillaging. People were looking for food and water. But the real criminals were these law enforcement who was ripping off the casinos and the hotels and all of these places that were abandoned and people's homes and ripping them off and stealing. That's where the real criminal activity was going on.
I agree. I look at Katrina as like the most sophisticated form of ethnic cleansing ever committed that I know of. And it just reminds me of like the documentary Banished or Sundown Towns. The difference was instead of just saying, niggas, you leave by sundown, they just waited for the hurricane. It's like probably decades ago they planned for this to be what it was, because when Gus alluded to in the very beginning stages, the military coordination surrounding the city, which said that it was a military operation. Then we just read tonight about the soldier drinking in front of these basically dying, dehydrated black people and not giving two hecks about them, our people being shot at on the bridge or wherever we went to try to escape the water. This was something that was predetermined. This is no different than any other form of ethnic cleansing that they've ever done. They just used the hurricane as the pretext to do it. And it's just, it's the most blatant form of white psychopathology. If anybody just wants to study the way white supremacy works, this is like the most brilliant treatise ever in such a sick and sad, debased way.
Yes, and it's also, following a trend of everything we've done over the years on the show. They just want to control where we live and be able to take our land, property from us. And to me, this was the ultimate of it all. But I mean, from, the Richard Williams book where his grandfather couldn't leave the plantation even though he was free, as a sharecropper, to the white lady, the racist who came on, and her father wrote a book about, she wrote a book about her father, and they were keeping the black people in Chicago. They couldn't own land or property, so they were paying these high rents to these white landlords. And if they missed one month's payment, it doesn't matter if they had a 15-year mortgage and it was the 13th year, they getting kicked out of that property. To the beach towns, how they've, came out even to, Asada's, family being kicked off of those beach towns. So them just taking a whole, what did you say, Gus, 100-something thousand of people in New Orleans, Chocolate City, and just basically making it a vanilla city, as probably Dr. Raytheon would say. And it was all planned, all planned. They were walking around in their flip-flops, just waiting for it to happen, like, hey, in 10 years, these niggas ain't going to be here no more. And that's what it is, It's all about dictating where we live, moving us. I think Mr. Fuller says, they got to move us around every so often. 200 years in New Orleans, nope, time for them to move. It's just ridiculous.
Right on. Gus is back. Took a little work. I've been back for a little bit, but took a little work. Wanted to make sure I got in. Thanks for the patience, folks. Continued in my absence. The portion at the end, I don't know if it was brought out or not. Heard some of the other commentary that you all were sharing. The portion at I guess this is like the end of chapter 3, where he says that Hill would dub this the exclusionist movement, the efforts by some within the white community to prevent the city's poor from returning. In my opinion, I think they had said earlier that it was a mere consensus that, hey, don't do anything that's going to make it easy for these black people to come back. I think that was said early on, like good riddance, they're out of the city, right on. I think, at least in my opinion, that sort of writing to make it seem as though not all white people were on board. Even if you do have an outlier here, the consensus amongst the white people was goodbye niggers. And just FYI, since it was mentioned, there is a chapter titled Vanilla City. It is much way down the road, but there is a chapter titled that coming down the road. I also thought when he said the last sentence of chapter 3, it was like watching them revert to their original state. Now, I did use that sentence in a piece of writing. However, I think that is not accurate to suggest that this is an original state. I think it's just normally they don't do this sort of thing out in broad daylight, strolling down the middle of the street. But this is the white mentality every day, all day long. These are the same white people. The white people normally do this sort of thing behind closed doors when they pick Ray Nagin and say, okay, or find some other non-white person and say, well, okay, we want you to run for mayor, and then we'll, lay out an objective that we want you to, push while we allow you to be in this office. I also thought that portion where Reese, where he was talking about they had spoken to all their friends and they were upset because lazy Ray Nagin wasn't doing anything about crime and unemployment, as if he could hire a bunch of black people. 80% of the people who voted for him, unless I've been misinformed, in 2002 were white people. If Ray Nagin or any other black person is not doing what they're supposed to do, I mean, really, like, I am certain the people that voted for him gave him an objective that they wanted him to follow. I cannot imagine these white people giving him a mandate to say, we want you to get in there and get those black people jobs. I cannot imagine, because they're complaining about unemployment and crime and all this other. I cannot imagine that they said, we want you to go in here and make things drastically better for the black people of New Orleans. I'm sure that's not what their strategy was, to then turn around and say, oh, yeah, this lazy nigger mayor, we're done with him. We got new plans for this. The height of hypocrisy, and they do this sort of thing all the time. I also thought it was, this might be an early instance of the author, Gary Rivlin, practicing racism, where he's talking, when he begins talking about Reese, and he talks about him as a charming rapscallion with twinkly blue eyes. I just said, wow, that is, we're talking about somebody who is blatantly broadcasting, we are about ethnic cleansing. These black people are out of here, but he's a charming rapscallion with blue eyes. Like, in my view, that sort of language, that's part of the reason why we do not make accurate assessments in the system of racism, white supremacy, where we minimize and use all this evasive language when we're talking about people who are practicing racism, white supremacy. This is the exact same type of campaigns that have been carried out, in my mind, as eugenics or anything else. They've been banished. Whatever. We're moving forward. And I think more of that detail is going to come out in the rest of the book. Yeah, I think I did hear folks already about the military presence and how we should look at that, the Israeli. I heard all that. Consensus, he already said that. The military prex, where they got a member of the Morel family, very prominent in the city of New Orleans, and they had to get some of their credentials to help them get through some of these checkpoints. Again, strong military presence. Also, I think the National Guard was present very, very early. I think the state of emergency was called before Katrina even hit Louisiana coast. So the National Guard, I think, was there very, very early. As he stated in the book, I think it was sending in military troops. That was what took a while. for that to happen, I think, until Friday that first week. With that, I think I even thought that sentence at the end, these will be my last two comments. The sentence, this is still in chapter 3, where Rivlin is talking about Hill, and he says, when he's talking about the guards being there drinking water in front of the people at the Superdome, and they don't care about them. Convention Center, excuse me. Or is it Superdome? I get the two mixed up. Superdome, where he sees all this go down. Anyway, where he says, Rivlin says that the guards or the other people, they didn't see the hordes of dark-skinned people as quite human, Hill thought to himself. I thought that was an interesting way of phrasing it. It wasn't a quote, so it wasn't like, Hill said this to him, directly, or he was quoting somebody else. That was the way he wrote it out. I just thought that was interesting. Folks can ponder on that. And even his use of the term super activism when describing Hill's young career, like I've never seen that term before. Not just an activist, you're a super activist. You're a super great white man who's been fighting David Duke for years and the Klan wars and all of this, and now you're up here spying on the racists in New Orleans after you brought water to dying, dehydrated black people. It's just like, this guy is, this guy defied and avoided evacuate just because it came from a black person. I mean, this guy is just a more refined version of the same thing. With that, I will pause. Hopefully next week we won't have all the audio issues. It was not pleasant, but thank you for persevering. Thanks for the folks being patient, hanging in with us, and glad everybody persevered. We should be back tomorrow, compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll catch up news, workplace racism, past 7 days. We also should be here on Sunday. If folks recall, last summer we had Daryl Washington on the program. Workplace racism. We were talking about all the difficulties he was having down in Bay Area, San Francisco, on his job. I think they were leaving nooses and what have you, and just being blatantly terroristic. He came on the program. He had already written about it. It was already public. He just came on and gave us more detail. He has been battling with them about this for like the past year. They ended up, his white employees listened to the interview that he did on the cows and brought that up in their future discussions. I'm really excited to get the update and to hear all of this has progressed over the last year, but he should be back on the program on Sunday. You can go back in the archives and hear, it was last July, 2014, when he was on, and workplace racism, the whole program, workplace racism, should be Sunday. We'll get the update, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And for folks who listened to the compensatory call last weekend, the clip where the black female, she wrote about her experience quote-unquote dating a white guy who turned out to have this fetish for black females. She should be with us on Tuesday. So 4 out of the next 5, we should be here, hopefully constructive. If you have questions, confusion, feel free to drop an email. Thanks again for all the folks tuning in, and we should be back same time next week to continue with Katrina after the flood. The weekend, be safe, be codified. I know summer's winding down. People will get in their last 2 rides in while it's warm. Be codified. You do not want to be consuming alcohol behind the wheel. Really, under the system of white supremacy, sobriety would be best. Be careful if you're going to be around other people who are intoxicated. I would say be mindful if they're non-white, and definitely avoid that if they're white people. You do not want to be around white people that are intoxicated. Things can go bad in the blink of an eye. With that, Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with black people. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Context of White Supremacy signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.